Hi, B Nation. Welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It's Thursday, May 30th. We've got a couple more days left in the month before we get to June 1st. And when we get to June, we're going to really dive hard into previewing the Notre Dame 2021-24 season. But today, we were going to preview a position, and I decided we're going to change course. And we're going to talk about Colin Cowherd. And I'm going to be honest with you guys. I'm as fired up for this show as I've been in a long time. I got my IB hockey jersey on today. I'm so fired up for this because I remember 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, driving around, working, listening to this guy on the radio and thinking, what? I wish I had a way to respond to this guy. Well, guess what? Now I do. And he made some comments that I'm going to respond to today in part one of the show. Then I'm going to get into some stuff about the Notre Dame schedule. And we're going to do a mailbag today because we're not going to do one tomorrow. I wanted to give you guys a chance to ask some questions, some follow-ups to this, maybe get some comments in. There's a couple comments I'm actually going to bring up during the show. And going to have a lot to say about this because there's just – not even practically speaking, there's things wrong with this, but it just shows a mentality and a mindset that I just can't stand. And there's a lot of things that I'm going to respond to this. So I'm going to look at this from a lot of different ways. I'm going to be factual. I'm going to make sound arguments, which are lost in the opposite side of this view. But I'm just going to be honest with you guys. I'm going to be pretty fired up today because so much of what he said is everything that is wrong with sports, with politics, with culture, with life, all of it. And so I'm going to dive into that at the very beginning and then start to break his comments down more practically. And that's going to be part one. As I said, part two will be some schedule stuff. And then I'll dive into part three, which is going to be a mailbag. So if you want to get some mailbag questions in, you guys know what to do. Put the MB on there or the mailbag emoji, and we will bring those up. I got a few of them starred right now. Ryan's going to jump in here in a little bit and star some more. So we'll be able to have a lot of them during the show because I'll have Ryan jumping in to star some and get ready for it. But that's what we're going to talk about today. So I hope you guys are buckled up and ready to go because I'm going to be a little fired up today. And so I'm going to try to stay on track, but I'm a little bit fired up today. So let's get to it. Let's talk about what Colin Cowherd said. And here's the thing is he's now had 3 segments where he's talked about this. Somebody just sent me the follow-up to that. I don't listen to Colin Cowherd. I only know what he talks about now. I used to listen to him just driving around just because there was nothing else to listen to. You know, it was either this or politics, and I only listened to politics from about 12 to 3, and then the rest of the time I was trying to find something worthwhile to listen to in sports. And so I saw the comments that he made yesterday, and I said I was going to respond to it. Then I listened to his interview with Bruce Feldman after the fact, where he doubled down on stupid, which I've always tried to tell you guys is a horrible idea. And then today he responds again and triples down on stupid, which is just a really bad idea. And so I want to just talk a lot about what he said, but everything he's saying to me, it just begins and ends with this reality. This is a loser mindset. This is a loser mindset. When you talk about the reasons why he explained why he doesn't want this, for one, he says, I have a philosophy. He said, I've written some nice quotes because I want to represent what he said properly. He said in his quote, he said, I have a philosophy of ducking. I want to duck the best opponents. And then he says, hey, I want to win natties. And then so Bruce Feldman said, well, join the Mountain West Conference. He says, well, the brand is too big and he wants to make money. That's everything wrong with all of this. I want to win a natty. I want to be a champion. I want to make money, but I want the easiest path possible to get there. And it just shows what's wrong with his head, and it shows what's wrong with why he's popular. And look, you guys know me. I am one of those people that believes in the American way. If you work hard and you have success, more power to you. I'm not one of those, he makes more money than me. He has more fame than me. Ooh, boo him. I don't like him. Screw that. I don't got time for that. Great job. Maybe someday I can get there. What I can't stand, and we see this with his audience, we see this with like Skip Bayless, is you get these people that speak to the lowest common denominator. They speak to emotion, not logic and practicality. They want an audience filled with people that just listen and absorb and think that they're great and just don't have any thought. We see this in politics now. People on the right, people on the left that are politicians, the advertisers, all these different grifts that are going on. They're speaking to the lowest common denominators. People that'll just worship the ground that they walk on and won't challenge them. And if you challenge them, we got primary you out. And it's the same thing here. It is a loser's mentality. I want to win a national championship. Cool. Us too. All right. What's your plan to get there? All right. Hear me out now. This is going to work really well. So we're going to schedule as soft as possible. So we only have to have a couple games we got to be ready for. And that's going to let us go win a title. Well, okay. You suck and you're a loser. And here's the thing. He's allegedly a USC fan. Like, do you think John McKay and Pete Carroll would be like, yeah, that's a great, no, it's a loser's mentality. You want this, but you're not willing to work for it. What does that say about you? What does that say about the program you supposedly respect? And where did all this come from? Why is he bringing this up today? Is this just to troll people? No, it's not to troll people. It's coming from a place of a legitimate situation that happened. Okay, so here's what happened. The conversation begins with them talking about USC trying to get out of the LSU game. And a lot of people talking about, why he's trying to do that or why USC is trying to do that. And then this guy, I'm going to try not to name call today. I don't think saying someone's got a loser mentality is name calling. And sometimes you just kind of are. I mean, just the derogatory names that I'm going to try to avoid today. So I'm going to try to avoid words like clown and stuff like that today. But he takes it into, why are they playing Notre Dame? So instead of looking at the rumblings, the rumors that USC is trying to duck LSU is the way it's being reported. I don't think that's what's going on. They want out of the LSU game. And my thing is, hey, let's talk about why that's the case. Why would USC want out of that game? Are they afraid of LSU? No, it's not being afraid of LSU. It's talking about looking at the schedule that you have and saying, hey, that might not be the smartest thing for us to do. It's talking about looking at the 2025 and the 2026 schedule and saying, hey, this might not be the best thing to do. Well, why is the schedule the way that it is? Well, let's look at USC's schedule. They play LSU in the opener in Las Vegas. Then they play Utah State. They have a bye. You play at Michigan, home against Wisconsin, at Minnesota, home against Penn State, at Maryland, home against Rutgers, at Washington, bye, Nebraska at home, at UCLA, and then home against Notre Dame. That's a brutal schedule. And say, well, why'd USC schedule LSU in the first place? Why'd they schedule Ole Miss in the first place? Well, they scheduled Ole Miss in 2020, and they scheduled the LSU game in 2021. Guess what USC was in 2020-21? They were a member of the Pac-12 conference. Their schedule looked completely different. If USC knew back in 2021 that their 2024 schedule was going to include a road game against Michigan, a road game against Washington, a road game against UCLA, and a home game against Penn State, and a home game against Wisconsin, odds are pretty good they wouldn't have scheduled LSU to start the season. If they'd have known in 2025 and 2026 that they were going to have to play some of the teams that they play in 25 and 26, like Notre Dame on the road, Oregon on the road, Nebraska on the road, Michigan at home, Iowa at home, UCLA at home, maybe they wouldn't have scheduled Ole Miss in 25 and 26. But the reality is they had they're in a Pac-12 conference that doesn't get a lot of respect. So if they want to make the 4-team college football playoff, which is what this schedule was put together for, then they don't need that kind of schedule, because now it's a situation where you could be really good and go 10-2 against the 2024 schedule. I think we would all agree that if USC was in a situation in 2024 and when they've got to play again, LSU on a neutral field, at Michigan, home against Penn State, at Washington, at UCLA, and home against Notre Dame, home against Nebraska, who I think is going to be improved, home against Wisconsin, who's going to be a quality football team, they go 10-2. That's a heck of a year for this USC football team. I think we would all agree on that, right? Well, guess what? That's not going to get them into a 14 playoff. When the schedule is put together, they knew they needed to have a really good schedule or good record, 11-1, 12-0, but they needed some really good non-conference wins because their league at the time was not going to get them a lot of respect. Because let's think about what was going on at Washington when the Ole Miss game was scheduled. Washington was terrible. They went 4-8 in 2021. They were going through the Jimmy Lake era. Chris Peterson was gone. Stanford was tumbling. Oregon was kind of okay. Oregon wasn't as good as they were under Dan Lanning. They were just kind of solid under Mario Cristobal, right? And so you had to look at your league and the realities and say, hey, listen, we're going to have to schedule another non-conference game to make sure we have a tougher schedule. Well, reality struck and their schedule changed because of the move to the Big Ten, but it's also not a 14 playoff anymore. It's a 12-team playoff. So I could sit here and make a case for LSU USC trying to get out of that game against LSU and saying it makes a lot of sense to get out of that game. And it not having anything to do with USC being afraid. Because look, we're Notre Dame fans, right? We're Notre Dame. We follow Notre Dame. We cover Notre Dame. One thing that I've said about USC that's been true for a long time that I respect about USC is they're not afraid to play a tough schedule. We've talked about that with Georgia. We've talked about that with LSU. We've talked about that with other programs, and then we've hammered people that are afraid to go out of their region or play tough schedules like Florida has done for a very long time. And so you could say, there's nothing about USC wanting to duck somebody. There's nothing about USC wanting to get out of a game. It's about USC being smart and saying, hey, listen, with the new reality of our schedule combined with the new reality of a 12-team playoff, our margin for error is a little bit wider. So we still need a challenging schedule enough to get in there if things go bad and we're 10-2. But do we really need it to be that bad where if we go 9-3, we've had a really good year, but still went 9-3? No, that's being practical because the reality is if USC knew what their schedule was going to be in 2024, when they scheduled the LSU game, they wouldn't have scheduled the LSU game. So that would be a rational argument. But Colin Cowherd decided to go in a different direction. He said, well, let's not have a rational conversation. Let's have an emotional conversation that lets you all know that I know nothing about USC, even though I'm a fan. I know nothing about college football. I have no values to speak of whatsoever, except these really like lame, I want to be a champion. I want natties and I want to make money. All right, cool. So does everybody. But I don't want to have to work at it. Well, that's a loser's mentality. It's a lame argument that is going to appeal to the masses of people that are simple, that don't want to be challenged. That's his audience. That's the Skip Bayless audience. And he preaches to that. And I have zero respect for that. It's a loser's mentality. You want the brand to be big. You want to make money. You want to compete for a title, but not do anything to actually work at it. You can talk about the brand being big, talk about making money. Well, let's talk about this reality. Since I actually do my homework and actually do study things and do actual some level of research, do you know the last time that USC's most attended game in a season was anything other than a Notre Dame game? I'll let you know. It's happened twice. Once was in 2020. They didn't play Notre Dame. And if they had one person show up at a stadium, which is about what they had in attendance because you couldn't attend games in 2020. And then 2018 when they played at Texas. You have to go all the way back to 2018 to find a season where Notre Dame, where actually, I'll get it even here. From 2019 to 2023, there has not a single game that USC played that had more people in the stands than every single game that they played against Notre Dame, whether it's home or away. Not one. You got to go back to 2018 to find that. So if you care about making money, wouldn't you want a team that's going to come play and bring a crowd and a relatively wealthy crowd who are going to spend money in the community and pay for the crazy high hotel rates and pay for the very expensive food and the very expensive parking and the very expensive tickets to the Coliseum? Wouldn't that make sense if you want to make money? I mean, I'm looking at some data and doing some research on this. And from 2016 to 2021, the most viewed game that USC played in was 2016 against Alabama. They had 7.94 million people watch that game. from 16 to 21, Notre Dame was their second most highest viewed game at 7.74 million. It's only 200,000 below the Alabama game, an SEC team. Do you know what the biggest audience they had on TV in that, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 6-year stretch? Their highest watched conference game was 4.3 million, which came in 2016 when USC was really good and Washington was really good. So Notre Dame had over 3 million more in 2018. And I could point to multiple games. Let's look at 2020. USC's most viewed game that year was a game against Oregon, where they had 3.85 million people watching on TV. That same season, Notre Dame versus Duke had almost 500,000 more people watching. Actually, over 500,000 more people watching than the biggest game USC played in all year, 4.32 million. Notre Dame versus Boston College that year had 5.14 million people. Notre Dame at North Carolina that year, 6.08 million people. And Notre Dame versus Clemson that year was 10.07 million. And actually, the Georgia Tech game was almost as viewed as the USC Oregon game. Oregon had I think it was 3.85 million. Notre Dame, Georgia Tech had 3.77. So if your goal is to build the brand and the goal is to make money, wouldn't you actually want to play teams that you're going to make money? And let's be real about something else. Interest in college football in the West Coast has gone down. Those people aren't going to care about you playing Northwestern at home or Wisconsin at home or Iowa at home or Nebraska at home. How do I know that? Because they've played a lot of those teams in bowl games in California. And the audience, the attendance wasn't anything close to what they have when they've played good teams. In 2015, they played in the Holiday Bowl against Wisconsin in San Diego, right down the street. I've driven from San Diego to LA. That's an hour and a half, right? They had 48,000 people at that game, the bowl game. In 2014, they played Nebraska in the Holiday Bowl. There were 55,000 people there. That's it. And if you go back and look, I'd be willing to bet you a lot of money that a lot of that crowd was Wisconsin and Nebraska people. So you're if you want to make money, why would you remove the biggest game on your schedule annually? It just makes no sense. So even his loser mentality way of thinking doesn't live up to you're not going to make up what you're losing. In that loser's mentality, this doesn't even make sense. You're not accomplishing the things you say you want to accomplish by doing this. That's point number one. It's a loser's mentality. He's also factually he had some factually incoherent comments and completely incorrect comments. He made this comment. I'm going to read it directly because I want to make sure that I'm being respectful to what he said. I can't stand people that spin things that are said and try to say, well, he said this when that's really not what he said. So I'm going to read you directly what Colin Cowherd said in his next segment. He said this: college football punted, because his whole premise was, I'm not a traditionalist, which is nonsense, because I'm pretty sure he'd be very traditionalist about when you put in work, you deserve to get paid. If his bosses came in and said, hey, this whole us paying you millions of dollars thing, no, we're not going to do that anymore. We're now going to pay you in fruits and vegetables. Because you know what? That whole paying you a salary thing, that's part of the patriarchy, and we're going to do this, and we don't want to do that anymore. And you know what? We've decided that the new way of doing things is we're going to exchange goods for services. So you're going to do your show every day, and we're going to pay you in fruits and vegetables. He'd become real traditionalist in a hurry at that point in time, right? So it's a silly, weak argument. I'm not a traditionalist. And then he'll kind of just like vomit for 3 minutes, just, word vomit for 3 minutes about all these, when Prince died. Nobody cares, dude. It's irrelevant. This isn't even about being a traditionalist. This is about supporting your own silly argument about the brand and making money and winning titles. You need games like this. But then he says this: college football punted on history last season. They disbanded the only Power 5 conference west of the Rockies. So spare me on the history. Okay, can you all help me with something here real quick? Did college football disband the Pac-12? Was the Pac-12 sitting out there, throwing the football around on the beach, having some fun, got all the ADs together, and they're plotting out the future of the Pac-12, and the NCAA came in, boom, kicks down the door like, you guys are done. You're going to the Big 12. You're going to the Big 10. We're going to send you guys to the ACC, and you two over here in the Northwest that nobody cares about, we don't care what you do. You're done. Is that what happened? Or was it not college football that disbanded the only conference west of the Rockies, Power 5, or was it USC that did that? Like, so much of what he said was acting as if this is being done to USC. Oh my God. College football came in here. The kings of college football came in with their armed security guards, kicked down our door to Pac-12 meetings, and disbanded our league. There was nothing we could do about it. They sent us to the Big 10. Now we've got to play Ohio State and Michigan and Washington and Oregon, who they forced to come with us. And we've got to play Penn State. I can't believe this is happening to us. This is so unfair that college football would do this to us. That's fiction. It's fiction. What happened was USC said, we can make more money going to the Big 10. So we're going to screw the 100 years of tradition we have in the conference and go here. Now, to a degree, I'm sympathetic to it because the money that was being thrown around, the absolutely garbage leadership that was going on in the Pac-12 caused them to collapse. And the first, it's like the first part of the foundation that was taken away before the building collapsed was what? It was UCLA orchestrating their and UCLA's exit from the league. They chose to go to the Big 10. They chose to leave. California and Washington chose to leave. They disbanded the Big 10. College football did not punt on history. USC did. So stop acting like USC's this victim here. This is a choice. And I'm not even begrudging USC for this choice because you know who's not crying about how miserable life is now? They've been forced to go to the Big 10. USC. They're making a practical decision, or they tried to make a practical decision to get out of the USC game. They made a choice. Choices have consequences. They tried to remedy it as best as they could. That makes sense. I got no issue with USC doing that. I don't like the fact they went to the Big 10. I've made some comments at the time about, you know what? If they want to destroy history, then, hey, maybe Notre Dame shouldn't play them anymore, to make a point. But to look back and act as if this is something that happened to college football, as if the powers that be in college football are forcing all this to happen. They forced Texas and Oklahoma to leave for the SEC. I can't believe that the thugs at the NCAA and the kings of college football would force them to leave the league. That's nonsense. It's ridiculous. It's such a shallow argument, and he's making it as if this was thrust upon USC. It was not thrust upon USC. It was a choice that USC made. We want to go play in the Big 10. That's a choice they made. They chose to go down this path. And then he made another comment. He says, USC is being punished because they have a national rivalry with Notre Dame. He talks about wanting to win natties. Who's punishing USC? Who's punishing them? I'm going to ask again. Who forced USC into this circumstance? Who forced USC into the Big 12? Who forced USC to schedule LSU? Who forced USC to say, hey, we're going to be the ones that are the reason why the Pac-12 dies? Who forced that? Who's punishing them? The only thing you can argue is that USC is a masochist, that they're willing to punish themselves for money. Like, it's a ridiculous argument. And again, and he does this. He'll make these comments, right? And you're like, dude, that's not even reality. That's not even like what's actually happening. You're making this ridiculous, silly straw man argument that's not even based in reality. It's not even sort of based in reality. It's not even like, well, man, here would have been a better one. Man, the Big 10 is kicking USC in the you know what's for, they're joining the league in the first year. They give them this team, and this team. And then in year two, man, they got to play Ohio, They got to play, Michigan and Washington and Penn State in year 1, and they got to play Oregon and Michigan in year 2, and in year 3 they got to play Ohio State and Penn State. And right now, this is terrible. Okay, but whose choice was that? It was yours. It was USC's. So if you want to say anything like, why did USC make this decision? Hammer that. Who was punishing them? It was their choice. It was their choice. They chose down to go this path. So to sit there and act like USC is being punished for having a national rival, okay. So because you've got a rival that's pretty good right now and is dominating the series right now, and there was a time that I remember not that long ago when USC dominated the rivalry even more convincingly than what Notre Dame is now. And I remember a time when I was a kid where Notre Dame dominated the rivalry, won like 9 out of 10 years, something along those lines during the Lou Holtz era, because that's what happens. I mean, Ara Parseghian would have at least 2 more national titles if it wasn't for John McKay and USC, right? I mean, how many times did Notre Dame enter the Coliseum ranked number 1 or number 2 with a chance to go play for a title, and USC ended it? Did you hear Notre Dame cry, oh, this is too bad. We'd have more national titles if we didn't have to play USC. And this is just so, I can't believe they're doing this to us. Why is college football doing this to us? We want to have 29,000 national titles, and we have to keep playing this really hard, well-coached, talented USC team. Oh, this is terrible. No, they chose that. And guess what? They kept playing. And eventually Notre Dame started dominating the series. And hey, Ara Parseghian won 2 titles, and those meant a lot because he still had to go through USC and John McKay, which makes those titles even more earned, not handed to them on a silver platter because you've softened your schedule as much as possible, but you had to earn them. So to act like this is something that is being thrust upon USC, show either A, he's not being honest, or B, he has no grasp of the situation. None. Like, he can't think past yesterday. In a lot of ways he can't, because of some of the arguments that he makes. So that's another aspect of it. Here's the next part that show. Now, this is when he starts to get into actual particulars of why he wants out of this series, which shows that, again, he has no concept of what's going on and what reality is. He can't think past yesterday. And that's a big problem with Colin Cowherd. So here's an argument that he gets into. He starts talking about the being in the Big Ten now. Now we've got to play Michigan, and we've got to play Ohio State, and we've got to play Penn State, and we've got to play all these tough teams, and we have to play Washington and Oregon. And that's so hard. And we play LSU this year, and we, and you got to play, LSU and Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State and Notre Dame. Well, guess what? You don't have to play Ohio State this year. Ohio State's not on the schedule this year. Next year, you don't play LSU. You don't play Ohio State. And guess what? You don't play Penn State either next year. So he creates this straw man about how difficult the Ohio State schedule is. Or USC schedule is. They've got to play this team and this team and this team. And they've got to go here and go there. And now they have to go play a November game in 11 degrees at Notre Dame. Can I ask you guys a question? When was the last time USC came to Notre Dame in November? Has that ever happened? Not in my lifetime. Last I checked, they always played these games in early to mid-October. When was the last time Notre Dame and USC played in 11 degrees? Can any of you remind me of that? Because I can't remember that one either. I've actually been at every Notre Dame home game going back all the way to Notre Dame USC home game going back all the way to 2011 when USC beat Notre Dame. I don't remember that happening. And if I were to go through history, I would be willing to bet you the last time that happened was way back in the day when the season didn't start till like late September. So this notion that they've got to go to South Bend and play in 11-degree weather in November is, again, it's a false narrative. Now, he's either being dishonest or misleading, or he has no clue what he's talking about. Maybe a little bit of all of it. But then he talks about like all the teams that they have to play. And they got to play LSU and Ole Miss. Well, guess what? That's going to change the next couple of years. You don't have to play an LSU every year. That's a choice. So if USC wants to look at their schedule and say, hey, we can't play 2 brutal non-conference games a year. We can't play Notre Dame and this week's schedule. Okay. I'm fine with that. Go play Fresno instead. That makes way more sense. And they actually do play Fresno again here soon. But if you would say, hey, look, we'll play San Diego State, a quality team, but a team we're going to beat. Okay, cool. I'm fine with that because you've got to play in the Big Ten, which has some quality teams, and you've got to play Notre Dame. All right, right now that makes sense to not also play LSU or Ole Miss or Oklahoma or Texas or another team like that. Teams or Auburn, teams that USC has played because you now have the potential for that. But here's the other part of it. This notion that you have to play all these teams in the same year is also dishonest. Because if any of you actually looked at the schedule, because here's the thing, I feel like his audience, he doesn't think his audience is going to do any research. And maybe they don't, but we do. And here's the reality of it. This year, USC schedule includes LSU, Michigan, Penn State, Washington, and UCLA. Notice two big absences from that. No Ohio State and no Oregon. In 2025, their conference schedule includes a game at Oregon and a home game against Michigan. You know who's not on there? Ohio State, Oregon, and Washington. 2026, they have to play at Penn State. They have to play Ohio State, Oregon, and Washington. That's a challenge. There's no Michigan on the schedule. 2027, they have to play Ohio State. No Michigan, no Penn State, no Oregon. 2028, they have to play at Michigan, at Oregon, home against Penn State. That's a challenge. Do you know what's not on that schedule? No Washington, no Ohio State. Do you know how many times between 24 to 28, a stretch of 5 years, do you know how many times Ohio State and Michigan are on the schedule in the same year? Do you know how many times they have to play both Ohio State and Michigan in the same year? 0. Do you know how many times Ohio State and Penn State are on the schedule the same year? Once. Do you know how many times Ohio State and Oregon are on the schedule in the same year? Once. Do you know how many times Penn State and Michigan are on the schedule in the same year? Twice. Not even half the next 5 years do you even have to go through this ridiculous scenario that you're talking about. And he starts talking about the SEC's got Georgia and Bama and Texas and all. They don't play each other every year. This year, Georgia has a very tough schedule. This year, Georgia has to play, we've talked about this, they have to play Bama. They have to play Texas. I'm going to pull up Georgia's schedule and make the point. Some years it's going to be like that. This year is that year for Georgia. Last year, their schedule was a lot softer. This year, Georgia plays Clemson in the non-conference and Georgia Tech in the non-conference. Do you know how many Georgia fans are crying about having to play Clemson? I don't know of any. I don't know of any media people that cover Clemson that are crying about them having to play Clemson, or Georgia that are crying about them having to play Clemson in the opener. I don't hear that. They've got to play at Bama, home against Auburn, at Kentucky, at Texas, Florida and Jacksonville, at Ole Miss, home against Tennessee. Now that's a brutal schedule. That's a tough schedule. It happens sometimes. Next year, you look at their schedule, they get Bama at home, Ole Miss at home, Texas at home, right? That's the way it works. They get the best teams on the schedule in a more neutral situation. And so when you look at the schedule, you say, hey, they very rarely do have these type of games. They're not going to give them their top games every year, because the reality is the reason that they're doing it in year one in the SEC and the Big Ten is because it makes sense. It's going to ease some of the fears that people have about destroying this other conferences by saying, hey, look, this is what we're going to give college football. Yes, I know you're not happy about disbanding this conference, and the Big 12, the way it was, is gone. It's now a much different Big 12, and we're doing this, and we're doing that, but we're going to give you Georgia, Texas. We're going to give you Georgia, Bama. We're going to give you Ohio State, Oregon. We're going to give you USC, Michigan, year one. We're going to give you those games. And then after a couple of years, they'll go back to where they don't do that. They don't force those things onto the top teams because there's a vested interest in doing that. That's why they only schedule these games really a few years out, not 6, 7, 8, 9 years out. The Big Ten USC schedule is like, what, the next 5 years? Right? The SEC, I only think, has the next couple years scheduled out. Why? Because you need to be able to adjust. You want to make sure that you're not giving your best teams this gauntlet all the time. And that's the reality of it. So when you look at the schedule, this notion that USC has to play this juggernaut of a schedule is false. And it's a straw man that he uses to try to make a point that doesn't exist. And when you've got to mislead people to make your point, then your point is weak. If you can't stand on the merits of your point, then your point is weak. And when you make this straw man argument about, oh, the Big Ten is, and if they win again, they have to play this other tough team in the Big Ten title game. Hey, guess what, cuz? This isn't the 14 playoff. It's going to be 12 for the next 2 years, and then it's going to expand to 14. If USC is in the Big Ten title game and they lose, the odds are pretty good. They're still going to be a playoff team. Now you're just crying about seeding. So and here's the other part. Even if they lose to Notre Dame and still make the Big Ten title game and lose, they're probably still going to be in the playoff. If they're good enough, they'll still be in the playoff. So this notion that, oh, well, the schedule's so hard because they've got Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Oregon, and Washington, and then they got to – do you know how many times in the next 5 years they have to play 4 of those 5 teams? Do you know how many times they have to do that? Once. 2026, they have to play Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, Washington. Once. They get Notre Dame at home. They got to play at Penn State, but they get Oregon State. They get Ohio State, Oregon, Washington, and Notre Dame at home. Here's a reality check for you, Mr. I want to win a natty. If you can't get through that schedule 10-2 or better, it doesn't matter. You're not going to be in the title anyway. If you play Penn State on the road, UCLA on the road, Ole Miss on the road, Ohio State, Oregon, Washington, Notre Dame at home, and you've got 3 or more losses, you're not a championship team. You're not going to be good enough to be a championship team. If you can't get through that, you're not going to get through the college football playoff. So it's a fake narrative that just kind of shows where he's at, and that's kind of the final point is, college football coaches are smart. They know how this works. ADs are smart in this regard. If you schedule well enough when it's a certain way, then you're actually preparing yourself for success, right? So Tom Izzo for years has scheduled really tough non-conference games for Michigan State. Why? They would lose several games. Why? His thought process was, we're gonna build ourselves up, and we maybe take a couple losses, but we're still going to get into the tournament because of our strength of schedule, and we're going to be way more prepared to go for a run. Now, basketball to football is not an apples to apples conversation, but there's a principle there that is important. Why has Georgia always been willing to schedule tough out-of-conference games? Why in the past has USC always been willing to schedule tough non-conference games, even when they had to play Notre Dame? Because smart coaches and smart ADs know that if you want to be successful, you have to schedule well to prepare yourself. So then you get into a situation where you're in a 14 playoff, and it's maybe not as advantageous if you're a USC or a Georgia or a Bama or Ohio State to win a title. So you schedule softer. And this is where the Michigan conversation comes into play, because he'll point to Michigan won the title last year playing a soft schedule. Well, you're pointing to the anomaly. You're pointing to the anomaly and saying they did it once. I mean, think about this. The college football playoff this was the 10th year, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 10 years of college football playoff. Name me another time when a team won a championship playing that soft of a schedule. There's teams that got in with softer schedules, but what would happen? They'd always get beat because they get exposed in the postseason. Now, even if you win the Big Ten with a soft schedule, you got to win 3 games. You can water your schedule down all you want. You can go 13-0, 12-1 every year, get a bye every time. But if you're not good enough, you'll get exposed. You'll get exposed. The 2017 USC team they were talented, but they weren't a great team. So when they played Notre Dame, they got exposed. They got destroyed, right? Because now, if you don't play Notre Dame that game and you go 11-1 in the regular season, still lose to Washington State, go to the Pac-12 title game, and then win the Pac-12 title game, which is exactly what happened. They beat Stanford in the Pac-12 title game. They go 11-2. Great. You get a New Year's Six game against Ohio State, right? If you duck Notre Dame, you're 12-1. You're a highly ranked team. You're playing Ohio State in the national in the college football playoff. Or let's say you're 2017, you're not playing Ohio State. You're playing Georgia, Bama, Clemson, Oklahoma. You're going to play one of them in the college football playoff. Guess what? You'd have got exposed. You'd have been 12-1, and you would have got exposed. You would have lost because your 12-1 was a paper tiger. You scheduled your way into success. You weren't a championship football team. Let's go back a year before. Let's go back to 2016. Georgia's schedule was a lot USC's schedule was a lot tougher early in the season. They opened that year with Bama. Got destroyed by Bama 52-6. Beat Utah State, then lost to Stanford by 17 and lost to Utah. They started 1-3, made a quarterback change around then and went on a run. Beat Oregon by 25 that year. Beat a ranked Colorado team. Beat a top 5 Washington team on the road by 13 that would eventually go to the college football playoff, and then they whipped Notre Dame in the Coliseum that year. Now, that wasn't a very good Notre Dame team. That happens, and I'm going to get to that here in a second. That happens. But they got to that year they played in the Rose Bowl against Penn State and beat Penn State, and that was a really good Penn State team. Now, in the modern landscape, back then, that schedule hurt USC because they couldn't play in the college football playoff because they had 3 losses. But let's be real about this. We're not in the 4-team playoff anymore. So in the 4-team playoff, if you'd have scheduled Notre Dame in 2016, you beat them, right? You'd have been maybe good enough to go on a run if it was different, but you didn't get in that year because of it. The next year, if you would have got rid of Notre Dame and replaced them with Fresno, gone 12-1, made the college football playoff, guess what? You still would have got beat. Oklahoma would have boat raced you in 17. Georgia would have boat raced you in 17. Alabama would have boat raced you in 17. And I think USC probably gets beat by Clemson. That wasn't a very good Clemson team either. But what have we said on this show for years? Roger Dodger, my man, my USC fans in here. Roger, you've heard me talk about this. What have I said about that 2016 USC team that was 9-3 going into the postseason? Nobody wanted to play that USC team. Nobody. Nobody wanted a 12-team playoff back then because USC would have gone on a run. Why? Because even though the season started a certain way, that Bama game exposed some weaknesses in that program that they fixed. They made the quarterback changes. They made some other changes. And so even though they were 9-3 at the end of the year, they would have been an 8 or 9 seed. I believe they would have been a 9 seed that year. They'd have gone into the playoff and gone on a run. Why? Because that team got battle tested. They got exposed early because of tough scheduling. They made changes, and by the end of the year, they were excellent. In 2017, the schedule was a lot softer. In 2017, USC didn't play in Alabama early to expose them, right? They played Western Michigan, boat raced them. They played Texas in week 3. It's a bad Texas team, 7-6 Texas team. They go on and USC beats them, and they go and only beat them by 3, by the way, in a very competitive game, if I remember correctly. Then they go out and play Cal, beat them, lose to Washington State, beat Oregon State, beat Utah. They're highly ranked. USC looks like a really good team. Then they had to play a really good Notre Dame team, a Notre Dame team that had been battle-tested, that had to play Georgia, that had to play Michigan State on the road, that had to play North Carolina on the road. They actually weren't that good that year. They had 2 huge games that they had to play that year. Lost one, won another. Notre Dame was battle-tested. USC played nobody at that point in time. Notre Dame boat raced USC in that game. And it could have been worse. It could have been an even bigger blowout, just like it could have been a bigger blowout for USC in 2014 when Steve Sarkisian called off the dogs on Notre Dame. That's part of the deal. That happens in rivalry games. Notre Dame destroyed USC. They exposed USC. You get rid of that game, guess what? You're not a better football team because you got rid of that game. Replacing Notre Dame with Fresno State does not change who you were that season. Because you know who else exposed you? Ohio State, who had 2 losses and got destroyed by Iowa in the regular season. That game was 24-7 and not close. It was not close. You got exposed. You would have got exposed. So what? You made a 12-team playoff. You wouldn't have won a title. Your 9-3 team from the year before, that would have made the 12-team playoff, that got challenged in the regular season, had to play Washington on the road, who was a playoff team that year with John Ross, Dante Pettis, and Jake Browning. Myles Gaskin, a running back, had a secondary filled with NFL players. You had to go on the road and play that team, which was better than anybody you played in 17, except maybe Notre Dame, and you could even argue they were better than Notre Dame in 17 because they had a better offense. What happened? You were battle-tested, and you beat them. You beat them on the road by 13. You beat a good Oregon team that year. You went into the postseason. You had to play a really, really good Big Ten team in Penn State, who beat Ohio State that year, by the way, which is why they played for the Big Ten championship. And you beat them in the Rose Bowl. That was a loaded Penn State team. Saquon Barkley, Chris Godwin. What was the name of that big, tall tight end they had back then? It was a loaded Penn State team. Loaded Penn State team. Nobody wanted to play that USC team in the postseason. Nobody. Because why? They were battle tested. Their weaknesses were exposed early. And if they would have played a really good let's be honest, 16 USC against Notre Dame in the Coliseum, if they played 17 Notre Dame in the Coliseum, they could have won that game. If 17 Notre Dame that boat raced USC in 17 would have to play USC 2016, that's a close game. Maybe Notre Dame wins. Maybe USC wins. Honestly, looking back, if I'm being completely honest with you, I think USC wins that game because they were more balanced. If you could slow down Notre Dame's run game, you could beat Notre Dame back then. They couldn't throw the football. USC couldn't stop their run game. Maybe they wouldn't have in 2016, but that was a better defense in 2016. So the whole notion of if you want to win a title, if I even grant your original premise, your loser mentality premise of I want to win a title, but I want to duck top opponents. You can't really do both. And you can point to, well, look what Michigan did. I don't know how much you actually know about sports, but I'm pretty sure you know enough to know that the exceptions don't define the rule. They don't make the rule. You don't get to pick one time out of 10 years and say, see, they did it. Let's make this our entire mantra. It's not going to happen because you're going to schedule yourself into success, go 11-1. You don't play Ohio State this year. You schedule weak non-conference. You beat a down Michigan team, beat a down Penn State team. You have a nice win over a quality Oregon team, and then you got to play Ohio State in the Big Ten title game, and Ohio State is legit. And what's going to happen? You're going to get your freaking butt kicked, and then you're going to go to the postseason because, hey, we got in as a 10 seed even though we lost the Big Ten title game. And guess what's going to happen? You may win the first round game, may not. But when you get into the quarters and now you're playing the real champs, the real teams in those leagues, you're going to get your butt kicked. You don't duck teams for an entire season and think, well, now we're healthy, we're going to be ready to go. You're not going to get exposed. You don't know what you don't know about your football team. You're going to get exposed. So you can't do both. You have to challenge yourself. Is there a line that you can cross or now you're just making it so difficult that you can't get in? Of course. But let's be honest as Notre Dame fans about something. A vintage USC team that has the talent to win 3 to 4 postseason games, really 4 to 5 if you want to include the Big Ten title game. So let's say they win the Big Ten title. They're good enough to do that. And they got 3 games they got to win. A vintage USC team is going to win those games if they play a legit schedule. Let's say that vintage USC team happens to lose a game in the regular season. Then they lose a game in the Big Ten title game, and now they're 11-2. Guess what? They're still in the playoff. They might even go 10-2 and then lose the Big Ten title game. Now you're 10-3. Guess what? You're still in the playoff. But you're battle tested, and those vintage USC teams would have gone on a run. They'd have gone on a run, and no one would wanted to play them after a month of rest. Nobody. And if people aren't afraid of you because you're not that good of a team and you just kind of scheduled your way into success, bring on USC. I want that. I want that USC team because I get to get a win over a team that's not that good, and I get the recruiting push that comes with, hey, we played USC at their place, or they came to our place and the playoff, and we kicked their butt, right? Because you got exposed. You'd be better off going 9-3 against a tough schedule. You're exposed for who you are. You know where your flaws are as a program. You know the areas you got to get better. You go to a bowl game against the 5th or 6th team in the SEC, and you win, and you're 10-3, and you go. You're better off with that. You're absolutely better off with that. Because you're going to now know what you need to do as a program to get better. But if you sleepwalk through a cake, I mean, look at Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma. Dominated it down Big 12. Dominated it. I mean, they'd lose a game here to TCU, then blow them out in the Big 12 title game. Lose a regular season game to Texas, whoop them in the Big 12 title game. Went to the playoff, 4 years in a row? What happened every time they got to the playoff? They got beat. They got exposed. They weren't good enough. Now, in 2016, they didn't make the college football playoff. Why? Because they played at Ohio State. They lost. They ended up losing 2 games that year. I think they lost to Houston and Ohio State, if I'm remembering correctly. Let me just pull that up so I make sure that I have my data correctly, because, here's this thing about actually wanting to be factually correct. 2012, they lost to Houston in the opener, and then 2 weeks later lost to Ohio State. Now, they ran the table in the Big 12. Now, if they would have scheduled 2 softer games in 2016, would they have gone 12-1 and made the NCAA tournament, the college football playoff? Sure, they would have. What would have happened in 2016 if they would have had to face Washington? Who was the 4 seed that year? Let me go look and see who the 4 seed was that year. So let me look here. 2017 college football playoff. I believe it was Washington was the 4 seed, if I remember correctly. Let's see, that was, yes, Washington. So let's say USC gets in over Washington that year because they schedule soft. They schedule weak in 2016, right? What happens to them? If they're not good enough, they get beat. That's just the reality of it. You get beat. If you're not good enough, you're going to get exposed. We were talking about Oklahoma, right? That was the point I was making. Let's say Oklahoma gets in 2016. They don't play Ohio State. They play Ohio. They play the Bobcats. Lose to Houston in the opener. Then beat Ohio. Or flip it. You play Texas State in the opener instead of Houston. That was that Tom Herman Houston team. You don't play them. You instead play Texas State. You beat them. You lose to Ohio State, but you're still 12-1. You're the Big 12 champs, and you're in the college football playoff. Take any scenario you want. You make the playoff. Do you guys think they'd have beat 2016 Bama? And if they did beat 2016 Bama somehow, does anybody really think that they're going to beat 2016 Clemson? The answer is no, they're not beating either of those teams. Why? Because they weren't good enough. So what that they were able to schedule themselves into success in those other years? So what? So what? Doesn't matter. You'd have gone to the postseason and got exposed. And then Oklahoma kept thinking, man, we're really good. And so Lincoln Riley's entire career at Oklahoma, he never had to change. Why? Because he kept getting to the playoff. He kept winning the Big 12 that way. And he got exposed. And if you schedule yourself into success now at USC, you're going to get exposed once you get to the postseason. The way to get there is to be in a better league. Well, they are now. I don't like how they got there, but they are now. So you've got to play Notre Dame. You're going to have to play Ohio State in the next 5 years. They play Ohio State twice. That's it. They play Michigan 3 times, Penn State 3 times, Oregon 3 times, Washington 3 times. They don't have to play all those teams. 3 of the years, they don't even play Ohio State. Now, if you're good enough to be a championship team, you may have to play Ohio State in the Big Ten title game. If you're good enough to beat them, you'll beat them. If you're not, you learn your mistakes. But if you will know, why aren't we good enough? I say this about Notre Dame all the time. If Notre Dame wants to be a national champion, they have to become the best team in the Midwest first. Haven't I not said that on the show? I have. They got to learn how to figure out how to beat Michigan. Some years they do, some years they don't. They got to learn how to beat Ohio State. This isn't just on the field, it's also on the recruiting trail. They had 2 shots at Ohio State last 2 years. Didn't get it done. So guess what? They're not there yet. We found out this year where Notre Dame fell short. We watched them play Clemson. We watched them play Ohio State. And what happened? Their weaknesses got exposed. Now, let's say that Notre Dame would have played Ohio U instead of the Buckeyes. And let's say they would have played, instead of playing Clemson, they would have played South Carolina. And instead of playing Louisville, they would have played Pitt. No, they already played Pitt. So instead of playing Louisville, let's say they played Miami. Well, what happens in that scenario? At worst, Notre Dame's 11-1. At worst. Or let's say they would have still played Ohio State. But instead of Louisville and Clemson, they get to play South Carolina instead of Clemson and Miami instead of Louisville. They would have gone 11-1, right? They probably make the college football playoff at 11-1, right? Probably. Good chance. Well, what would have happened when they'd got there? What would have happened if this Notre Dame team would have scheduled themselves into success, not played Ohio State, not played Clemson, not played Louisville, and gone to the postseason 12-0, 1 or 2 seed? What would happen? What would have happened if they'd have played Texas? What would have happened if they would have played Michigan? What would have happened if they would have played Washington or Texas or Florida State? If they would have got in, they'd have got beat. Why? Because they weren't good enough. There were flaws in the team. They got exposed. But if Notre Dame scheduled themselves into success every year, and every year they're a playoff team, then they may say, hey, look, we're pretty good. You get the whole BS Brian Kelly, just got to play a little better and coach a little harder. No, you got exposed. Your warts got exposed. And so guess what Marcus Freeman was able to do this season? He was able to say, hey, look, these are where we're short as a program. So what do we got to do? We got to go out and fix it. That's what winners do. You want to get punched in the mouth. I need to know as a boxer that my right-hand jab sucks. Now, I can beat a bunch of bums with it, but when I fought somebody as good as me, I got my butt kicked. So guess what happens? I get back in the lab. I train more. I work on it. I come out, we'll get you next time, right? Or if you're a real champ mindset, you're going to say, hey, look, I'm going to fight this guy whenever I can because I want to be the best. And to be the best, you got to beat the best. So I want that fight. I want to fight that guy. But what this cat's saying is, now I want to be the heavyweight champ. I just don't want to box anybody in the top 50. I just want to get it and just not have to face anybody. You know, I want to Rocky 3 this thing, right? Where the belt gets vacant. It was Rocky 5, right? Part of that garbage movie. So the guy he fights, Citizen Kane or whatever, Tommy Morrison beats. He didn't have to beat anybody to get there, right? That's the whole premise. What are they trying to portray? Loser, paper champ, not real. That would be what USC was. But that's not USC. That's not what makes them one of the greatest programs of college football history. That's not what has made them a champion. They didn't win all those titles under John McKay and Pete Carroll because they were afraid. What was Pete Carroll's mantra? Hey, we'll play anybody anywhere because the hardest games we're going to play all week are on Tuesday and Wednesday in practice because that's how good we are. That's how we compete. That's how we battle. But this guy wants to take this loser's mentality of I want to duck top opponents because I'm a coward. My man, just because that's in your name doesn't mean you got to live by that. Don't be that. That's a loser's mentality. It's irrational, it's illogical, and it's not at all practical. You can't schedule your way to a championship in a 12-team playoff. You can't schedule yourself to a championship in a 4-team playoff. You will get exposed. And you know who knows that better than anybody? Your head coach. Because he did that 4 years, 3 out of 4 years, 4 out of 5 years. Oklahoma got to the playoff. 1 year with him as the assistant coach, as the OC, right? 15. Then he got in as the head coach in 17, got in 18, got in 19 because he beat up a bad league, scheduled his way into success. And what happened? They got their butts kicked every single time. Had one competitive game that whole year. And you know what that team had going for them in 17? We knew that was a really good Oklahoma team. How do we know that? Because they beat Ohio State on the road. That team was good enough to compete. The only competitive Oklahoma team that they had in the postseason was the year that they had to go to Ohio State and beat Ohio State, right? Because they showed themselves to be a really, really good football team. Beat TCU twice that year. They went to the postseason and gave Georgia everything they could handle. The next year, they play a bad UCLA team in the non-conference. They play Army. They barely beat Army. They go through the season. Their only losses to Texas. They get a rematch against Texas in the postseason. And they get to the college football playoff, and they got to play Bama. And what happens? They got outclassed the entire game. They got outclassed. If it wasn't for Kyler Murray doing Superman stuff that game, it'd have been just as big a blowout as every other year. Then you look at 2019, another year, right? You play Houston in the non-conference. They weren't good. You play South Dakota. You play UCLA. They weren't good. Then you beat up a bad Big 12. You lose to Kansas State. You end up beating Baylor in the Big 12 title game. You made it to the college football playoff. Guess what happened? Joe Burrow has 7 touchdowns in the first half. You got exposed. You lost 63-28. They were a fraud from a championship perspective. And you know why? Because they never scheduled hard enough to expose themselves. And why do you need to expose yourself? Because if you do, you now know what I need to do to fix it. He got exposed last year. They had to play some teams that could play defense. They had to play some teams that kicked his butt in the trenches. He got exposed. He realized I can't outscore everybody every year. What happened? Terrible year for USC last year. 6-0, going into play South Bend. You're a top 10 team. You're trying to beat Notre Dame. You think you're coming off an 11-win season, played in the Big Ten, Pac-12 title game. You got the Heisman Trophy winner. Got all these transfers. You're feeling good about yourselves. Preseason top 10. You went out and played Notre Dame, and what happened? You got destroyed from start to finish. Then they went out the next week and lost to Utah. Then they barely beat Cal, lost to Washington by 10, Oregon by 9, UCLA by 18, and they finished the year 7-5 with a Heisman Trophy winner, number 1 overall draft pick. So what happened? Did Lincoln Riley say, well, we'll just coach a little better, play a little harder because we're still – No, he got exposed. And what did he do? First time in his career, he really got exposed like that. What did he do? He went out this offseason, hires DeAnton Lynn, who did a phenomenal job of turning around the UCLA defense the year before. He goes and hires Eric Henderson as his D-line coach, who has a great reputation as a D-line coach. And he hires Doug Belk, who was a finalist for the Notre Dame D coordinator job in 22 when they hired Al Golden. That's his new DB coach. Why did he do that? Because, hey, we can't win a title where we have to score 50 points every week. I had the Heisman Trophy. I had the best player in college football, and I still couldn't do that. We have to stop people. It's a lesson he never learned. At Oklahoma, why? They scheduled soft. So if you want to win a championship in today's game, you got to challenge yourself. You can't have a loser's mindset. Colin Cowherd has a loser's mindset. He doesn't understand football. He doesn't understand how the game works. He doesn't understand how you got to push yourself. It's a physical game. And if you don't play a physical game until the playoff, you're going to get exposed. You're showing yourself. You're exposing yourself. You're getting exposed now because you don't know sports. You talk about it all the time, but you're clearly exposing. You have a loser's mindset. You're not going to be successful that way. You're not. So stop wishing your favorite team was that way. This isn't even about Notre Dame anymore. This is about having a loser's mindset. We have way too much of that now. Way too much of that now. Let's placate to the lowest common denominator. Let's take the extremists who will believe anything that we say and let's pitch to them because they'll gobble it up, and we love being loved. That's way better than having to actually do research. Actually having to spend the time of putting together rational thoughts, having a rational conversation. That doesn't sell. Okay. At what point in time do you realize I'd maybe rather not sell than to be a sellout? That's what it comes down to. It's a terrible argument. It's a terrible mindset. It's impractical. If USC does what Colin Cowherd is suggesting he does, they will not win a championship. They'll never be good enough because they're not going to get exposed the way that they need to get exposed. And that's why it's just a stupid argument. But can we talk about one other thing? What this really shows, Colin Cowherd does not understand Notre Dame at all and never has. Ever. He's one of the, I almost used the C word. He's one of those people that have bought into the Brian Kelly life for years. Oh, Brian, and yeah, I think he said it recently. Oh, Brian Kelly inherited a bad roster and a bad team. He had to turn it around, and Marcus Freeman inherited a good team. I've already exposed that as being just utterly false. Roster-wise, Brian Kelly walked into a pretty good situation. Program-wise, culture-wise, it was a hot mess, and he had to turn it around, right? But he did, to a degree. He had to make some changes. He got exposed in 2016. Realized, can't keep doing this. My strength program sucks. I can't win with this D coordinator who's garbage. I got to do something different. And some of that was Jack Swarbrick saying, you got to do something different. And what happened? He won a lot more, but he got exposed. You don't understand Notre Dame. And he said something which made me laugh. Today's little response, because I'm assuming he caught a lot of pushback. He goes on this little silly 3-minute, fear this, don't fear that, this change, that change, which just absolutely shows he doesn't understand the sport or understand the game. And he's like, don't fear things. Don't fear things. Things change. You know what he fears? He fears Notre Dame. He doesn't respect Notre Dame. He thinks it's just this uppity program with these smart kids that aren't good athletes. I mean, I've seen him make arguments about Notre Dame lacks speed in years where I'm like, okay, Notre Dame lacks things, but that ain't one of them. But it's just this lame thing. Well, everybody says this, so let's hold on to the low common denominator, lazy arguments about Notre Dame. Oh, Brian Kelly's such a great coach. He had all this, if he could go to Notre Dame and just coach this bad roster into 12-0 this year and 12-0 that year and 10-0 this year and 12-1 that year, why couldn't he coach an LSU team with the Heisman Trophy winner, 2 elite receivers, one of the best lines in college football, 3 drafted defensive tackles, all this talent? Why couldn't they win more than 3 games? Why did they get boat raced by an ACC team? Why? Brian Kelly said, I've never won an opener. Why? Keeps getting beat by ACC teams. Why? Because he ain't that guy. He's not the guy you think he is, but you've bought into the lazy arguments. That's the problem. You can't see past your nose. You can't think past yesterday. And that's the issue. If USC was dominating Notre Dame right now, let's be honest. If you flip the results the last 12 years, Notre Dame's 8-4 against USC. And if you go back to, I believe, 2016 was the last time that they lost USC before last year. So Notre Dame won in 17, 18, 19, 21, and 23. USC won in 22 against a Notre Dame team that was missing some dudes. So 5 out of the last 6 games, Notre Dame has won, and a lot of them weren't very competitive. USC won in 16, Notre Dame won in 15, so then you could say 6 of the last 8 games. They've won 8 of the last 4. They were a little back and forth in the beginning of Brian Kelly's tenure. Notre Dame won 10, USC won 11, Notre Dame won 12 and 13, USC won 14, Notre Dame won 15, USC won 16. So the first 7 years of Brian Kelly's tenure, they were 4-3. And then he went on a run. 1 in 17, 1 in 18, 1 in 19, 1 in 21. Then Marcus Freeman comes in, loses in year 1 to USC, and then gets back on track in year 2, dominates USC. So if it was reversed and USC won 5 of the last 6 games, does anyone think that this is a conversation that's happening? Does anyone think that? No. It's a loser's mindset where you don't understand who Notre Dame is and you don't understand what Notre Dame is about. Here's the reality, Colin. If you had if you understood the sport at all, you would realize that USC at 9-3 against a brutal schedule is going to have a much better shot at getting into the playoff as a 10 or 11 seed and actually going on a run if they're good enough. If they're good enough. Best USC team of the last 15 years was what year? Roger Dodger, I'll ask you. Last 10, 15 years. Let's go back to 2010. What was the best USC team? When you talk about the team that at the end of the year you say that's the best football team. Who was it? It was the 9-3 16 team. That's what I believe. If there's any USC fans in here, what do you guys think? I think there's no team that I would have been more afraid of in the postseason if I was another team than the 2016 team. They went 9-3. That was the team that had the only team that I've seen of USC since 2010 that would have had any chance of making run at a championship was a team that went 9-3 in 2016. But they got exposed early. They had to make changes. They switched quarterbacks. There were some other moves that went down. And guess what happened? That team got right. By the end of the year, they were top 10 team. That team would have made the 12-team college football playoff. And they would have gone on a run. Because they beat one of the 5 best teams in college football that year in Penn State. That was an excellent Penn State team in 2015. Excellent. Loaded. Mike Gesicki just popped in my head. That's who that was. That was a loaded Penn State team. Loaded Penn State team. And, that Penn State team also was great at the end of the year. Why? Because they got challenged early. They played a good Pitt team on the road. They went on the road and played a really good Michigan team. Lost both games. Guess what? They had to right the ship. A few weeks later, they beat Ohio State. 2 weeks after that, they blow out a ranked Iowa team. They go to the Big Ten title game, have this great comeback against a top 10 Wisconsin team. They were what? They were battle tested. And guess what? That Penn State team would have made the college football playoffs also that year. And they wouldn't have had to play USC. They might have had to play in the second round, third round maybe, but not in the first round. Both of those teams would have been battle tested with multiple losses, and they'd have been ready to go on a run when they got to the postseason. There's a lot of Oklahoma teams that had great regular seasons against weak schedules that would have gone to the college football playoff, maybe won their first game, and they got exposed the next game. That would have been the reality. I'll take that 16 USC team, and I'll take the 16 Oklahoma team over any Oklahoma team that made the college football playoff. Every single one. They were tested. In a 12-team playoff, they were tested. They would have gone on runs because Oklahoma wouldn't have to play Georgia in the first round. That was not – they caught a Georgia team that caught some breaks that game. Oklahoma battled them. That was a great game. And then Georgia took Alabama to overtime. So it's about a weak mindset, a fundamental misunderstanding of how football works and what makes football. And that shouldn't surprise anyone that's ever listened to his football takes. He can talk betting all he wants. I don't care about that. You don't know football. And it also shows that there's a lack of respect. He says, well, and then the final one. Notre Dame needs this game. USC doesn't. Again, you don't know Notre Dame. You don't know football. You don't understand what builds a champion. There's no champion in football that's ever won that avoided top teams or was able to win by not having to play top teams. You can point to Michigan's schedule all you want. Guess what? Yes, they played a weak schedule, but they beat Penn State on the road. They beat Ohio State. They beat Iowa. They beat Alabama. And they beat Washington. This isn't like the NCAA tournament where Michigan got to the Final Four a few years ago and never had to beat anyone higher than a 7 seed. This isn't beat Loyola Chicago in the Final Four. But then what happened when they played Villanova in the title game? They got exposed. If you're not good enough in football, you won't win. You won't win. Yes, Michigan had a weak schedule this year. They did, but there was multiple times they would have got exposed if they were that weak. They would have got exposed against Penn State or Ohio State or Bama or Washington or even Iowa. They would have got exposed. If USC is going to schedule themselves into success, they will eventually get exposed. And again, the exception doesn't define the rule. So you don't get Notre Dame. If you think Notre Dame needs this is the same mindset that led people in 2020 to believe that Notre Dame fans, some Notre Dame fans even believe this. And this is what makes me sad. You have Notre Dame fans saying, well, that's a good argument that he's making. That's a terrible argument that he's making. That's sad. It makes my heart hurt that some of you have that mindset. But think about 2020. Oh, Notre Dame's in trouble. No COVID. No one's going to play Notre Dame. This is the chance. Force them into a conference. Guess what happened? ACC was begging Notre Dame to come join the conference. And if Notre Dame was a true independent with no ACC tie-in, I promise you, anyone that knows a thing about this sport would have known the Big Ten, the SEC, the Big 12. They all would have begged Notre Dame to join their league for that season because they know what Notre Dame's about. If you want to make money, play Notre Dame. Do you really think that if USC dropped Notre Dame, that Notre Dame would have a problem scheduling someone else? And hey, buddy, USC has sucked for the last 14 years for the most part. Notre Dame's dominating this rivalry. Notre Dame fans complain about how weak the schedules were that Brian Kelly played from 17 to 21, and they're right. But why was part of the reason those schedules were so bad? Because of USC sucked most of those years. Notre Dame doesn't need USC for the same reasons that they don't need the ACC or the Big Ten. And then you're like, well, if they join a conference, then I'll play them then. Okay, so that exposes a flaw in your argument as well. Notre Dame does not need USC. Notre Dame chooses to play USC. USC doesn't need Notre Dame. They choose to play Notre Dame. What they need is to have a winner's mindset that says we will play anybody anywhere, and we do value tradition. Because why does USC want to win a natty? If you were a Utah fan or an Oklahoma State fan or a Rice fan or a Baylor fan, would you be saying, hey, we need to do whatever we need to do to win time? No, because you're a Baylor fan, because you're a Rice fan, because you're a Utah fan. You're not winning national titles. But you're a USC fan. You want to win natties. Well, what makes you think you can win a natty? Tradition, history makes you believe that if we do what we need to do, we can win a title. Are Cal fans talking about, no, we shouldn't do this because we want to win natties? No, because they're Cal. Are Stanford fans doing that? Hey, we need to do this one? No, because they're Stanford fans. Their history and tradition tells them we are not them. We are not Notre Dame. We are not USC. We're not Alabama. We can't be them. What makes you think USC can? What makes you think USC is a good enough program to go win a title? Where's that arrogance come from? History, tradition. That championship mindset is locked into that. Why do USC fans care about winning? Because that's what they know. Anyone over 20 knows that. You want the loser's mindset, then go be a fan of Baylor. Where you go 10-2, you're ecstatic. But you can't have both. But you can tell me all you want, I'm not a traditionalist. Yes, you are. Because you think USC can win a title. You actually think that. And you should. They're USC. But what makes you think that? Well, they're in a great talent base. So is UCLA. So Stanford. So San Diego State. They can recruit LA. Why not? Why does no one care about San Diego State? Why does no one care about Cal? Tradition, history, reputation. That's tradition that you don't care about. Why do Fresno State fans not have the same mindset as USC? Because you're Fresno State. You have no history. You have no tradition of championship football. So if you want to say, well, I want to be a national champion, I want to win natties. Why? Why does any USC fan care about winning titles? Why? Because that's your USC. That's your history. That's your tradition. So you are a traditionalist. You're just weak-minded. I want this wonderful thing. I want a great dinner, but I don't want to make it because I don't want to do dishes. I want to win, but I don't want to work at it. I want to be a great baseball player, but I don't want to take those extra swings outside. I just want to stay inside and relax. I want to be a great football player, but I don't want to go to the gym. And I don't feel like throwing 100 balls today. And I don't feel like running wind sprints, but I want to be a champion. Can't do it without work, man. Can't do it by scheduling yourself. Well, okay, if I play nothing but sucky teams, then I won't have to work as hard. You're not going to win. You're going to get exposed. It's a loser's mindset. You don't get Notre Dame. You don't get what winners do in football. You don't truly get. You get sports from an outside standpoint. You don't get sports from an internal standpoint. You don't, because everything you're saying tells me that. You don't get it. I'm not a traditionalist. Yes, you are. Because if you weren't, then you wouldn't be talking about USC winning titles, because it's been a long time that Notre Dame's won a title, but it's getting to be a pretty long time since USC won one as well. USC's last title was in what? 2004? We're now over 20 years since USC won a title. It's been a long time. So what makes you think USC can – how many playoff bursts did USC have? I know Notre Dame fans, you're going to love this, right? How many playoff bursts has Notre Dame had from 2010 to now? 14 seasons. How many times has Notre Dame either been in the playoff or played in the BCS title game? How many times? Since 2006, how many times has USC played in the college football playoff or been in the BCS title game? Same number as Baylor, I believe. Same number as, actually, less than TCU. TCU in the last 15 years has more playoff or BCS appearances than USC. Washington has 2. Washington has won more college football playoff games than USC has played in. Oregon, same deal. USC has many college football playoff appearances since 2010 since Stanford. They have as many as Cal. They've played in the BCS title game in the last 15 years as many times as Arizona, Oregon State, Indiana, Iowa, Northwestern, Wisconsin. So what makes you think that USC should be talking about natties? History. Tradition. Otherwise, you'd be happy with 10-2. I just want to be 10-2 and playing a good ball game and make money. But history tells you that USC should be better. Tradition tells you that USC should be better. So don't tell me you're not a traditionalist. Don't say, spare me history. Because history is the only reason that you even think that we should be having this conversation. History of what USC was and history of Notre Dame kicking the crap out of USC for the last decade. That's what you care about. But that may change. If USC wants to win, please, for the love of all things holy, don't take this approach. Notre Dame doesn't need you. You don't need Notre Dame. But what does it say about your mindset? I don't want to play that game. Notre Dame's too good. We don't get anything out of that. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. And if you don't understand why, find another team to root for. Seriously. If you don't understand why USC and Notre Dame matters, even now in the current landscape, find another sport to follow. Find another team to root for. Because you clearly don't get USC. And Notre Dame fans, we can say we hate all USC, all you want, but you know what we're going to do? We respect the heck out of that history. Especially older Notre Dame fans, because I promise you, some of the cats in this chat that are 50 plus years old, my man Lou Samoji would talk about this all the time. Notre Dame would have a whole lot more national titles if it wasn't for USC. And USC would have a whole lot more national titles if it wasn't for Notre Dame. That's what makes it great. But you want to tap into that history. I want it to be like it was under Pete Carroll. I want it to be like it was in John Robinson the first time. I want it to be like it was under the legendary John McKay. I want it to be like that. That's the history I care about. That's the tradition I care about. But I don't care about this tradition because this tradition is punching us in the face right now because you can't see past your nose. You can't think past yesterday. Because if you realize, hey, you know what Notre Dame should mean for us? They're the standard. If we want to win a title, we got to be better than Notre Dame. That's step one. What I've said about if you want to win a title, Notre Dame, you better be better than Ohio State. Now you need to be better than Michigan. That's the standard. Why are you talking about Bama? You can't even beat Clemson. Why are you talking about Georgia? You can't beat Ohio State. You can't beat Louisville. So if you want to get there, beat them first. What Notre Dame presents USC is a team that plays a different style of football and a team that has to go. Hey, you're worried about playing Notre Dame in November in the cold? A, you don't have to. B, what happens if you're a 9 seed or a 10 seed because you lost to Ohio State and Oregon? You may have to go on the road and play a team in November that's cold. Just saying. But if you look at Notre Dame and Ohio State as the standard, well, you're going to play Notre Dame a lot more than Ohio State. If you want to be good enough to beat Ohio State, you better learn how to beat Notre Dame first. That's how it works. If Notre Dame wants to go play Bama, they better learn how to beat Clemson more consistently. They better learn how to beat a good Florida State team. They better learn how to beat Michigan. They better learn how to beat Ohio State. Then you can worry about Georgia and Bama. You better learn how to beat Texas A&M. That's what you got to do first. If you're USC and you want to compete for a title, here's the thought. Get good enough to beat Notre Dame. Because if you're good enough to beat Notre Dame, you may drop a game here and there in the regular season, but that game's going to prepare you to go win in the postseason. And that's how it works. And what tells you that? Tradition and history. So don't tell me you don't believe in that. Because you do. You just want to pick and choose to make a silly, ridiculous loser mindset argument. And that's all he's done. That's all he's done. That's what this is all. This isn't about USC. It's not about Notre Dame. It's not about LSU. It's about having a loser's mindset. And he has a loser's mindset. And he doesn't understand football. He doesn't understand championship football. He doesn't understand what it takes to go compete at the highest level. And if you're afraid to play a tough schedule, then you're never going to be a champion. You're not. You're not. You can point to a team here, a team there, once every 30 years. Doesn't happen. Look who USC had to beat when they were rolling. It didn't matter who they played. Auburn, Ohio State, Virginia Tech. Didn't matter. Oklahoma. Didn't matter. We're USC. We'll play anybody, anywhere, anytime. And if you don't believe in that, then find another team to root for. Because you don't really respect USC's history and tradition. You say you do because you want to win natties, but you don't. So find somebody else. because I don't have time for losers and I don't have time for weak mindsets. Way too much of that going on in our country right now. And that's why people say, oh, don't waste your time with him. Well, I felt like it because it needed to be responded to. So that's my response to that absurd take from Colin Cowherd. We're going to take a little bit of a break here, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk a little bit about, speaking of scheduling, we're going to talk about Notre Dame's schedule. We're going to talk more about their 2024 schedule, which is getting closer and closer to being finalized from a kickoff time standpoint. We'll talk a little bit, have some fun, with some teams that we would like to see Notre Dame play maybe moving forward. And we'll get into it that way. And then, of course, mailbags are going to come next. If you guys have so a lot of y'all have been engaged in what I've been talking about. Love that. But we are going to do a mailbag here at the end of the schedule conversation. I'm going to put the IB music on as we just take a little bit of about a minute break. When I come back, we're going to talk about the Notre Dame schedule, and then we'll do that for about 15 minutes, and then we'll dive into a mailbag. So if you guys have questions or comments that you want to get in there, go ahead and throw those in there. Put an MB on there now. Right now we only have 10, so it's going to make for a quick mailbag. So if you want to get something, if you want to say your piece, even if, guys, it doesn't have to be a question. If you want to say your piece about this, then say your piece, and we'll bring it up. We'll give you guys a chance to weigh in on this. And I'd love to hear. I believe Roger Dodger had a question or a comment up there that I'm gonna try to find about Notre Dame and USC and what that would mean for Notre Dame. If you just want to make a comment, make a comment. If you want to ask a question, ask a question. And we'll get that rolling here when we get back and start. We'll talk about the schedule, then we'll dive into mailbag. So before I go this little break, folks, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. And if you have not done so, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. We had a big intel piece. We talked some recruiting stuff, some team stuff the other day. So Irish Invasion is coming up, and we're going to have a lot going on. So you're going to definitely want to be a member of the Irish Breakdown Premium Board, which you can find at boards.irishbreakdown.com. If you're watching now, you can see it down there. If you're listening via the podcast app, you can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So we'll be back in a minute to dive into the next topic on today's Irish Breakdown podcast. All right. Welcome back, everybody, to part 2 of today's Irish Breakdown podcast. I'm going to be quite as fired up about this one. We're going to talk a little bit about the Notre Dame schedule. I'm going to give you guys some thoughts. I know that the guys at IB Nation Sports Talk discussed that last night. So I'm going to give some thoughts about a few things, talk about that schedule. We're not going to do like a full schedule breakdown today because we're going to do that, I think, about start here in the next couple weeks. Vince and I are going to have some shows together. We'll do that. I'm going to might do one maybe with Ryan here soon where we kind of break down the schedule and just do what we normally do. We'll do opponent overviews each week. We'll do like breaking it down by quarters, toughest stretch, all the superlatives about the schedule. But I did want to kind of share some thoughts on the schedule because this week things started to get finalized a little bit. We're starting to see, what the schedule is going to look like. And it's going to be very interesting to go over this because some of the things that have been issues in the past that has had Notre Dame fans rightly concerned about how the schedule played out are not going to be options this year. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. So what news has broken over the last couple weeks? Well, one, we already knew what Notre Dame's schedule was like as far as the starting times for the first 2 road games. So the Texas A&M game was 7:30. I was actually a little surprised by that when you talk about Clemson and Georgia playing that day and Florida, Miami. I kind of thought maybe Notre Dame might be a noon game or a 3:30 game on ABC, but they are the 7:30 ABC game. So it is the prime time game of the day. Notre Dame plays at Texas A&M. Then 2 weeks later, they play at Purdue, and that game is going to start at 3:30. And then yesterday, Notre Dame released their schedule for their home games. They're considered their home games from a broadcast standpoint. Now, when we talk about home games from a broadcast standpoint, that also refers to the Shamrock Series game. So it's the 6 home games plus the game at Yankee Stadium against Army. And they released their home times, and there were some changes. So first we'll go over what those times were and then dive into a little bit about it. So the Northern Illinois game is first home game of the year. That will be on NBC and Peacock. It'll be a 3:30 game. Their next home game is 2 weeks later against Miami of Ohio. That will be on NBC and Peacock, a 3:30 game. The next week they play home against Louisville. That will also be a 3:30 game. I really thought that might be a night game. But it is not. It's going to be a 3:30 game, and it's only going to be on Peacock. So that was one of the things too, and I will talk about that here in a minute. They have a bye week after that, come back home against Stanford, play that game also at 3:30. Then they play at Georgia Tech. That game is yet to be determined kickoff time. So that's the first game on the schedule that right now they don't know the kickoff time for. Then the next week they play at MetLife against Navy. We didn't know what the kickoff time for that game was going to be yesterday. We do now. That's come up during the show. Then they have a bye week. Then they play Florida State at home. That's going to be a 7:30 game on NBC and Peacock. Next week is Senior Day, November 16th. They play Virginia. That game will be on NBC and Peacock. That will be a 3:30 game. I don't know if I said this, but the Florida State game is going to be a 7:30 game. So 7:30 for Virginia, Florida State, 3:30 for Virginia. The next week, they play Army. That game is going to be at 7:30 on NBC and Peacock. And then the final game of the season, Notre Dame plays at USC. That game also does not have a start time. That will likely be a night game. I believe the last time that Notre Dame and USC played where it was not a night game, I believe, was all the way back in 2016. So 16 and 14 years where Notre Dame was struggling down the stretch, they played night game. They played day games. Whenever Notre Dame is good and they're playing at USC or there's some intrigue, that's usually a night game. 2010 was a night game. 2012 was a night game. 2014 was a day game. 2016 was a day game. 2018 was a night game. And then 2022 was a night game because those were at the very least decent Notre Dame football teams. So I expect that to be a night game unless USC is just terrible. I don't expect USC to be terrible this year. I've told you guys that before. Yes, their schedule's hard, but I actually think this is going to be an improved USC team. And we'll get into reasons why as we get into our breakdowns of our opponents here down the road. So that is their schedule. So just a few thoughts about their schedule. First of all, one of the things that people complained about last year was the fact that Notre Dame had multiple night games in a row. And part of the problem was Notre Dame scheduled Ohio State, Duke, Louisville, USC in a 4-game stretch. The 2 games that they had control over were at the beginning and end of that stretch. That was Ohio State and USC. They made them both night games. Well, you kind of have to assume that there's a good chance if you're playing on the road. Notre Dame, a lot of times when they play on the road, they get night games, especially if that team's decent. Duke was good and Louisville was good. And we came into the season knowing that Louisville was going to be a top 25 caliber team. And what was the trap game? What was the sleeper team we talked about all year? It was Duke. They weren't getting respect for being a 9-4 team. I wasn't surprised that Duke was ranked at that point in time. And, of course, they were. That was a night game. Louisville was a night game. So Notre Dame had 4 weeks in a row, including back-to-back road games that were night games. And people talked about how that was a challenge, and they didn't have that. Well, that's not as much of an excuse this year. Notre Dame does have multiple night games this year in a row, but not like they did last year, not quite like they did last year. So the first night game of the year is at Texas A&M. That'll be a night game. But then you're not playing another night game. At the earliest you can play another night game would be October 19th at Georgia Tech. Now, that may not even be a night game. We'll see. The last time Notre Dame played Georgia Tech at Georgia Tech was 2020. That was not a night game. Georgia Tech wasn't very good. If Georgia Tech is the team that I think they can be this year, I could see them having a decent record at that point in time. You know, they play Florida State and Ireland in the opener. They play Georgia State, at Syracuse, home against VMI, at Louisville, bye week, Duke, and then at North Carolina. So there's some challenging games in there. If Georgia Tech's defense doesn't get any better, they'll lose to Florida State, they'll lose to Louisville, they'll lose to North Carolina, and they may lose to Syracuse under Fran Brown and Duke as well at home. So there's a lot of games they could lose, but they could also beat every team on their schedule except maybe Florida State. And so if they're a 5-2 team, how many games do they play before they play Notre Dame? Let me see here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So let's say they're 5-2 or even 4-3. There's a chance that's a night game. And so, that's another potential night game. But the earliest after August 31st, the earliest that Notre Dame's going to play another night game is not till October 19th. The concern was, for me, when I was looking at the schedule, was if they make this Navy game a night game, which they have done before. If you guys remember 2014, Notre Dame and Navy was a CBS game that I believe was a CBS game, but they played it at night. So we've actually seen this game at night before. It's not often, but it has happened. And so, so it was a little bit concerning about how that one was going to play out. Actually, was that a Shamrock game? That might have been a Shamrock game that was played at night, but we've at least seen that game occasionally be played at night. And if Notre Dame is ranked undefeated and ranked really high, it only enhances the chances because I believe that game was going to be on CBS. So that got announced today. That game is now going to be at noon is what they announced. So they're going to play Georgia Tech on the road. Then they're going to go back to New Jersey the next week before they have a bye, and then they play at noon. My concern was going to be if they played a night game, it would have been potentially night game Georgia Tech, night game Navy, bye week, night game Florida State, day game Virginia, night game Army, night game USC. And so now you're talking about 5 of your last 6 games are at night. Well, now the Navy game is going to be at noon. So you've got maybe Georgia Tech on the road at night, but then your next 2 weeks are early. And I'll talk about why that matters here in a minute. But then your Navy at noon, bye week, then you play Florida State at night, 7:30. The next week you're at home again against Virginia, day game. And then your last 2 games, Army is going to be at night. USC will likely be at night. So that November stretch of 3 out of your last 4 games being at night is not ideal, clearly. But one of those night games it's not. Here's what made last year's 4 straight night games harder. So number one, night games are not easy for a team like Notre Dame because normally when they play night games, it's usually far away. It's New Jersey, it's Atlanta, it's California, it's Boston, it's College Station, Texas. They're usually further games away. And so when you play those type of games, you're getting back super late. So we'll be, game kicks off 7:30, 8 o'clock. Game's over 11:30, 11:45 at the earliest, sometimes later. Players have to go shower, get dressed. We have to do the Marcus Freeman press con. I mean, they're not getting out of there till 12:30, 1 o'clock sometimes. And then you've got to go to the airport, fly overnight. You get back really early, and it just completely messes up your entire schedule. You play a 3:30 game, you're done by 7:30. You're out of there by 10 or 11. You're home by 1 o'clock, and you get a little bit of extra sleep to move the next day, but you get back on track pretty easily. If you play a noon game like against Navy, that's even better because you get to come back, and I mean you're going to be back. When Notre Dame plays Navy, you're likely going to be back in time to watch the 8 o'clock kickoff games. The Purdue game is going to be somewhat similar as well because that game's going to be over. If it's a 3:30 kickoff, it's over by 7:15. You shower, you're out of there an hour and a half. It's 8:30. It's a 2-hour drive home. You're home by 10:30. So back in the day, you'd have been home in time to watch Pac-12 after dark. So that's multiple road games where you're going to be able to play earlier and be home early for road games. So at least 2 road games now are going to be that way. And then, of course, playing Army is a little bit easier than playing Duke or Louisville, who are really good football teams and really physical football teams. And so I think that sets up nicely. Obviously, the November is going to be a challenge, but you do have a bye week. You have multiple bye weeks actually late in the season as well, which I think helps Notre Dame. You have a bye week on October 5th, so you're over a third of the way into the season. So you're 5 games in, you get a bye. Then you get 3 more games against teams you should beat, and then you get another bye. So before you play that stretch of Florida State, Virginia, Army, USC, you're going to get a bye. Now, here's the other aspect of this. The 4-game stretch where 3 of your 4 games are at night potentially, because again, we're working with the assumption that USC will be at night. 3 of those 4 games are at night, but 2 of those opponents aren't going to be very good. At least not for a Notre Dame team that should be contending for a title. I mean, I think Virginia's going to be better this year. You watched Virginia last year. They would compete. I mean, they'd lose games, but they were competitive. They weren't just going out there and getting steamrolled every single week. They're a scrappy team. They don't have a lot of talent. That's not a game you should lose. And then, of course, Army is under Jeff Monken, really well-coached football team. I'm a big fan of Jeff Monken as a football coach. Seems like a really good guy. Has always respected Notre Dame in comments he's made. So that'll be a fun game to cover. I remember him talking about Notre Dame back in 2016 when they got boat raced by Notre Dame. You just hear him talk about what that game meant and the rivalry, and not the rivalry, but just like the matchup and the respect they have for Notre Dame. But they're not that great. Army's not that great right now. And I believe Army's somewhat going away from just a pure triple option, because what's happening is you're seeing the triple option change a little bit. We've seen it change in Army, and some of these great option coaches are struggling to figure it out because there's been rule changes. You can't cut the way you used to. You can't block them. Like, one of the things that a lot of triple option guys do is they're preachers of cut on the perimeter. I coached 2 years under an option guy, and he was like that. And I'd make all my cases for why that didn't make sense. It ruins your play action game. The timing of it puts guys on the ground. Sometimes they can get up in time to go make a play. It's more wear and tear on your receivers. So they're always going low, 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 low. I just didn't think it made a lot of sense. But those triple option guys are dead set on you cut on the perimeter, cut on the perimeter, cut on the perimeter. You can't do that now. You can't cut on the perimeter like the way that you used to. The rules are different. You can't cut along the line the same way you used to. The rules are different. And Troy Calhoun has done a masterful job of adjusting to that. And his flex bone is different. They hit different. They'll do more shotgun stuff out of it. And so there's a lot of things that he's adapted to it, where Coach Nia Matalolo had a hard time adapting to the new rules. And so the offense just struggled. And then Coach Monken's had some issues here and there as well, because it's harder for them to recruit the kind of quarterbacks that you need to be able to adapt and throw the ball more effectively. And when you look at Navy in recent years, when they've been really good, they either had a super dynamic quarterback like Malcolm Perry, or there was a year in 2016 with Will Worth where he was a much better thrower. I mean, if you remember the big play Will Worth made in that game to beat Notre Dame in 2016 was a 4th down in cut to Jameer Tillman that he hit for a first down. It was a great ball. Great ball. I don't know that Malcolm Perry can make that play. Now, Malcolm Perry still might have converted the 4th down, but it might have been more likely on a run. But if you look at the Malcolm Perry years, Malcolm Perry's teams weren't as competitive against Notre Dame as that Will Worth team was. Why? They were a little bit more balanced. And with some of these rule changes that we've seen in recent years, it's just really hard to run a true triple option football team. And so, yeah, Henry, you know me, I love the triple option, man. So that's one of the things that's kind of adapted as well, where those option games, like, we as fans are still stuck in the mindset of it. But at the end of the day, you also have to look at it from the standpoint of, like, this isn't the same triple option that you've played before. You can't cut like you used to. You can't do some of the things that would cause some of the perceived injury, updates that you had. So it's not the same wear and tear as it was before. And Notre Dame doesn't, they play Navy and then have a bye. And then, as I said, Army's just a little bit of a different animal before the USC game. So I think the schedule sets up pretty nicely in that regard, even with the two late night games, potentially at the end of the year. So the Virginia game is a day game. They're not a great team. So it's not like playing Duke. It's not like playing Louisville. They're just not on that level. Army's not on that level. So even if they were all night games, it's not the same as playing Ohio State, Duke, Louisville, and USC. It's just a little bit of a different animal. Now, playing those last 2 games on the road, that's a challenge. And a lot of Notre Dame fans are probably going to have some flashbacks to 2015 when Notre Dame went on the road to Boston, played BC, super sloppy game, won 19-16, but had 3 red zone turnovers. Deshaun Kaiser threw a pick in the end zone. He had a screen pass, got tipped and picked off. Josh Adams fumbled inside the 5. It just super sloppy game against a bad BC team. And Notre Dame went out in the next week, played Stanford. They had to fly out the West Coast after Thanksgiving, played Stanford, played down to the wire and then lost. Well, a couple things about that. Number one is this is not 2015 Stanford. I think USC is going to be better this year, but they're not. I don't think. I mean, anything can happen, but based on my analysis of the team, I don't think they're 05 Stanford or 15 Stanford. I don't think they're that Christian McCaffrey, Kevin Hogan Stanford team. They're just not that. They're good, and I think they're going to be better than maybe some people think. I'll probably have USC in my top 25. I haven't determined that just yet because I still have some rosters I have to break down, but I actually think this is a decent USC team, and with the coaching changes they made, I just think they're going to be a better football team than they were last year. We'll see, even without Caleb Williams. So we'll talk about that as we get into the offseason. But I just think that's a much more manageable schedule than what we saw. So I actually like the kickoff times for me has made it to where I think the schedule is challenging. It's not elite, but it's challenging because there's a lot of quality teams, even though there may not be any elite teams. There may not be an Ohio State on this roster. There may not be a 2017 Georgia, 2019 Georgia on this schedule, I should say. But there's a lot of quality teams on there, which is what makes it challenging. And there's some tough road games in there, which also makes it challenging. So the higher volume of night games should help that. Now, let's talk about some of those changes. So this obviously breaks a little bit from tradition. I believe the guys talked about this last night, so I won't spend too much time on it. This is going to be the first time since, I believe, 2000 and I'm trying to think the last time that Notre Dame played one of the two Pac-12 schools, because this is how Notre Dame's schedule goes. They play either Stanford or USC in October at home, and then they play the other, Stanford or USC on the road at the end of the season. So when they play USC at home, it's always in October, and it's at home. And then they'll play Stanford end of the season on the road. And then the next year they play Stanford at home early in the season in October, and then they'll play USC on the road. The last time Notre Dame played one of those teams, and it was not a night game, was all the way back in 2014. If you guys remember that game, that was when Everett Golson threw that touchdown pass to Ben Koyak at the end of the game on, I believe, 4th down to win that game. And then obviously the 2012 game also was an afternoon kickoff. So that this isn't like, oh gosh, you're ruining tradition from 50 years. No, 2010 with Andrew Luck, that was a day game. This really started in 2015 is when this really started, with the 2 home games at night. And then, of course, they'd have one later in the year. So it's going a little bit back to the way it was. And then, of course, you'd also have the Shamrock Series was a lot of times at night. So you'd have that 3 NBC night games. Well, now there's 2. My guess is this is I would hope partly Notre Dame wanting this, for reasons that we've discussed in the past, to maybe take a little bit of that night game burden off of the players. I would hope that's part of it. I think the other part of it, too, is the new NBC contract with the Big Ten. Because now you want to have some extra weeks where you're going to have some of those games. And so, I'm actually was curious about this when I was kind of talking about this. I was like, I wonder what Big Ten games are being played that week that Notre Dame's playing against what we're just talking about, Stanford, right? So the week of, what would it be? They play Stanford the week of October 12th. So I was looking at that and kind of wondering who those teams, what the schedule was. So I'm actually going to pull this up here real quick, and I want to actually see who they play. So if you look at the week of October 12th, that's going to be week 7 of the college football season. So I was actually curious, what games were that night. So you have you have Ohio State at Oregon that weekend. I would imagine, since Oregon's not part of the Big Ten, that they may want that game at night. So I was wondering if there might be Big Ten reasons why they're having that game at night and not just because of Notre Dame wanting it. So I wonder, and then you also have Penn State at USC that weekend. So you have 2 really good Big Ten games that are going to be probably better night games than Notre Dame and Stanford. So I'm hoping it was sort of a mutual decision and, look at it that way. And then now Notre Dame still has 2 night NBC games, but only one of them's at home. The other one will be late in the year, November 23rd against Army. So they'll still have the 2 NBC night games. They won't be the October home game is not that night game now. And that's the difference. Now, I think that works out well for Notre Dame, as I broke down before. Now let's talk about the Peacock game. There are 2 ways to look at this game. One is as a Notre Dame fan. As a Notre Dame fan, I hate it. I don't care if it's a 3:30 game or a 7:30 game. I don't care when the kickoff was. I hate that it's on Peacock. I hate the fact that you're not playing this potential big game, this big rematch game for Notre Dame. I mean, this is a game that a lot of Notre Dame fans have circled on their calendars, and I'll bet you steak dinner anywhere you want, that there's a lot of Notre Dame coaches and players that have it scheduled to. Now, coaches are going to say, hey, look, we're just worried about Texas A&M. I get all that, but listen, I was a coach. And coach said, yeah, I may have that, but you're telling me that Ohio State and Michigan going into week one don't have circle on their calendar the game against each other late? Of course you do. Now, your preparation is only focused on that game, but trust me, when you're out there working out and it's the summer and you don't have coaches around, the guys that are really hungry, the guys you're going to win with, they're thinking about Louisville. Of course they're thinking about Georgia Tech. I mean, Virginia or Texas A&M. Of course they're thinking about USC and Florida State. But I promise you, that Louisville game is going to be circled. And when they get to Louisville week, I'll be willing to bet you a whole lot of money that's going to be a locked-in Notre Dame football team, a really locked-in Notre Dame football team, because they're going to want some payback for the embarrassment that they went through last year playing Louisville. I just wanted that to be a nationally televised game. I wanted that to be an NBC game. I didn't want it to be a Peacock game. As a fan, I don't like it. Because here's the thing, okay, maybe a lot of Notre Dame fans are going to tune in because they're Notre Dame fans, but Notre Dame gets a lot of people to watch Notre Dame because they want to watch Notre Dame lose, and they want to watch that game. And so the ratings are going to be way down from where it normally would be. I think that would have been one of those games. It would have been one of the highest ranked games of the season. And so I don't like it as a fan. I don't like having games on Peacock unless it's some game nobody cares about. And okay, you got your game on Peacock. So I don't particularly like it. I don't like putting these NFL games that are going on Netflix. And it's like, why do I have to? I mean, the whole point of cutting the cord that all these people are doing is so I didn't have to keep paying $150 a month for all these. Well, now it's like, well, you've got your YouTube TV or Fubo. You've also then got to pay for Peacock. You've got to pay for Paramount. You've got to pay for Netflix. You've got to pay for, all these other things. I pay for like PureFlix. I mean, there's all these things that I got to pay for. And it's just like, dude, now I'm paying more than I did when I just had cable. And so it kind of sucks. Having said that, there's the other way to look at it. That's the fan take. The other way to look at it is a business owner. I mean, listen, it benefits Notre Dame if NBC thrives. It benefits NBC if the Peacock network grows more subscribers. I mean, it does. Now, my advice to NBC would make a better Peacock product. I mean, I watch shows on your app, and they're never as clear and sharp as when I watch Paramount or when I watch Netflix. Like, so put out a better product, first of all. Your football broadcasts suck on Peacock right now. I'm sorry, they do. Get better there, and more people will be willing to sign up. Having said that, if you just look at this from a bottom line dollars and cents standpoint, it makes sense for them to do this because there's a lot of Notre Dame fans that will not buy Peacock because they're boycotting it because I'm not paying for Peacock to watch Central Michigan and to Central Michigan. I don't care. I'm not going to buy Peacock to watch them play Toledo. I'm not going to watch them. I'm not going to, buy Peacock to watch them play. What was the Peacock game in 2022? Do you guys remember what the Peacock game was? It was UNLV. That's what it was. I'm not going to pay to watch you play UNLV on Peacock. I'm not going to watch for you to play NBC on Toledo on Peacock. So it doesn't really drive your bottom line the way it would if you did play a bigger game. And so looking at this from a business standpoint, if I'm being honest, you have to look at it that way. If you work for NBC and you work for Notre Dame and your goal is to make NBC a better product, yeah, there's a lot of things you need to do about better announcers, better quality of game, better camera action, do a better job, actually covering Notre Dame and really focusing and make your pregame product better, make your halftime product better. There's all types of things you can do, but at the end of the day, there's one easy thing you can do. Make it a bigger game. Have your Peacock game be a bigger game. Because a lot of fans who kind of have that, screw it, there's no way I'm buying Peacock for that game. All right, cool. It's easy to say that when it's Central Michigan. It's easy to say that when it's Toledo. It's easy to say that when it's UNLV. Very easy to say that. But what if it's a really good Louisville team and Notre Dame is playing a Louisville team that's probably going to be undefeated? They play Austin Peay in the opener, then they play Jacksonville State, then they have a bye, then they play Georgia Tech at home. There's a good chance that Louisville is going to be undefeated and ranked in the top 25 when they come to play Notre Dame. Well, there's a much better chance that I can get tens of thousands, if not more, Notre Dame fans to kind of say, all right, fine, I don't love it, but I'm not missing this game. Some will still hold true. Some will say, I'm not watching it. Screw it. I'm selling it. Okay, that's fine. You made that choice. I respect that. I do respect that. If you're willing to, if you have a belief in something and you're willing to take away something you love for a week to do that, I'm serious. I respect the heck out of that. I wish more people were willing to sacrifice things we like and love for our principles and things we believe in. And I'm totally respect that. Others are going to say, listen, I think it's crap, but I'm going to get Peacock. And other people say, listen, it's title money. I mean, it's a tough economy, man. And $6.99 for a month is not an easy thing to do. I've had people reach out to me, say, Bryan, I don't want to cancel my subscription, man, but I need to, as a father, I need to be responsible and not spend this money on certain things. And I get that. I mean, you may think, it's only $5. Yeah, I get that. But for some people, and I've been there before, $5 on things like that, and so, yeah, it's only $6.99. I understand that. But for some people, when you're struggling to make ends meet, $6.99 is a lot. I understand there's always circumstances that you just can't make it happen. Having said that, there's a lot of people it's just a principle thing. And a lot of those principle people, or some of them, are going to say, I'm going to bite the bullet and just do it anyway because I'm not missing this revenge game. I'm not missing a top 25 battle, even if I got to pay for Peacock for a month. Well, bottom line wise, business wise, it makes a lot of sense for it to be a better game. So I get that. I get it. I get it from both sides. I get fans not loving it and not wanting to watch on Peacock, especially until the product gets better. I understand all that. But from an NBC Peacock Notre Dame standpoint, it also makes a lot of sense why that's the case. Because if Peacock grows and Notre Dame is a reason for that, then you're going to want to see NBC wanting to do more Notre Dame type content and be willing to pay Notre Dame for that, knowing that, hey, we can put this Notre Dame series on here and a lot of Notre Dame fans are signing up for Peacock. And, so we'll put this Notre Dame special here and we'll do this Notre Dame thing here and know that we're going to drive even more Notre Dame fans to Peacock. And that's how you make more money. And then when Notre Dame is a free agent again in 5 years, because think about this, if you're Notre Dame and you create your say, we'll put some of our big games on Peacock. We're going to drive this revenue thing. We're going to help you grow and make you more money because then in 5 years, you're going to pay us even more money. We want to convince you to pay us Big Ten money. Well, make yourself valuable. It's a smart business decision is the point. I don't love it, but it's at least I can understand it because it's a smart business decision. So that's my thoughts on the Peacock thing and Notre Dame's overall schedule. We'll take a deeper dive into the schedule when we get into more deeper into June and have more time to really break down the schedule. I'm fired up. I don't know if you guys have done this yet, but yesterday I went to Barnes & Noble. I decided to be a good husband, which I try to do more often, but don't. And so I was going to call my wife. She was at an appointment over at the mall, and I was going to have her stop at Barnes & Noble and get me a magazine, but I decided not to do that. We went out to dinner first, and I went over to Barnes & Noble, got my Lindy's preseason magazine, going to be getting Athlon as soon as it comes out. Why am I getting Athlon? Well, number one, I get Athlon every year. Number two, I wrote the Notre Dame preview, which I'm very excited about. I'm going to brag about a little bit because it's kind of been one of those. It would be really cool someday if I was able to write the Notre Dame preview, and I was able to do that this year. I don't know if they're going to ever want me to do it again. I hope that they do, but that's going to be pretty cool. So I want to see my name at the very beginning of all the people that wrote that. So I'm very excited about that. And then, of course, Phil Steele is going to come out. And so this is what I use to do some research, and it sends me down, doing research on the internet, breaking down some games. So we're going to spend a lot of time. Vince and I also bought one for Vince. So Vince is going to come pick that up later today and help me. I bought you this magazine. Come over and grab it. Oh, while you're here, can you help me finish unloading our pod that's in our yard so we can finally get rid of that and get moved into the house. So that'll be awesome. So we're going to start diving into teams, doing some analysis. I'm going to do some film breakdowns on Notre Dame's opponents on the board over the summer. So I'm going to dive into some Duke defensive film to show you kind of what I think that the defense is going to look like. Maybe do some film breakdowns of some of their early season opponents and some of their late season opponents as well, just to do those things. That'll all be on the premium board, but that's going to really start happening over these next couple weeks. So we're going to take a deep dive into their opponents off the air while we're doing other stuff so we can be really on point to do deeper dives when we get into it. I'm also going to try to have some guests on either Sean's show or my show, kind of helping us break down some of these teams. I'm also going to try to get some guests on our show that can help us preview some top national teams as well. So, I'll try to get somebody from Ohio State on and Texas and stuff like that. So it's going to be a fun summer, and we're going to have fun breaking that down. But this at least gives us a little bit of an overview of the Notre Dame schedule now that it's looking more and more finalized. So there's really only, I believe, 2 games left, right? Didn't I say Georgia Tech and USC are the only 2 games left where we don't know the kickoff time? So looking forward to that as well. So we're going to do mailbag next. So before we go, do me a favor, folks, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review if you're listening via our podcast platform, whether with our partners at Spotify or Apple or wherever else you get your podcast, your pleasure met. And of course, if you have not done so, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. There is no better way to show your support for Irish Breakdown than to sign up for the message board. There's no better way. This is also a great way. Super chats are a great way. Reading our articles are a great way. Signing up for our newsletter, which you can find that in the description box below. You can find our link to our newsletter there. Send you all of our content. But there's no better way to support us than going to the premium message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Part 3 of today's show is going to be a mailbag. Now, we have a few super chats that I'll get to at the very beginning, but if you want to get some questions in now, Ryan is still in on the back end, starring any mailbag questions. And anything you want to ask, put an MB in front of it or a mailbag emoji. That way we know that it's a mailbag question and not just part of the normal conversation that is happening. And you guys have had some great conversation today. So I'm going to get into the mailbag question. We're going to start with some of the super chats. First and foremost, Captain Veal Scalapini. Do you think NBC is going to allow USC to back out of the Notre Dame game? For being in media, Cowherd is quite ignorant. You know, this is a great point that I saw your super chat. I'd like to be able to say, well, I was going to talk about this, but I decided not to when I saw your brilliant super chat question come up. But I didn't even think about this. Is another angle to even think about when you talk about financially. Why would the Big Ten or NBC want USC to back out of that game? Because now USC, that's another game that the NBC is going to get. Whereas if USC plays a home and home with Texas or you pick a bad team, Vanderbilt. Yeah, you get the Vanderbilt game at home, so we get that game, but no one's going to care about that game. And then when you go play at Vanderbilt, we don't get that game. Where now every year NBC is going to get USC and Notre Dame every year. That's pretty great. So now you potentially, to the point earlier that Henry Reich brought up, not only are you going to get 2 Notre Dame night games now with Army and Florida State, but there's a good chance that in November, NBC is going to get three Notre Dame night games in November because the Notre Dame USC game this year could either be on NBC or CBS. I'm not sure which one's going to get it, but there's a chance a lot of years. I shouldn't say every year they're guaranteed it because there are some CBS games and along there as well, but there's a good chance that in a lot of years NBC is going to be able to get the Notre Dame USC game. So it would make a lot of sense. So that's a great point, Captain Veal Scalapini. Very great point. And thank you for the super chat also, by the way. My man, just your ordinary Joe. Thank you, Joe. How true is the allegation that ND USC is a one-way rivalry akin to Notre Dame Purdue? That is, ND considers USC to be their arch rival, but USC does not share the sentiment. Defend your answer. Well, I mean, we've got someone in our chat who's a USC fan and Roger Dodger. And have you ever heard him make that argument? I've only seen media people make that argument. I've never heard of a former player for either team make that argument, for USC make that argument. I've never heard of a coach make that argument. I've never heard of a fan that I know that makes that argument. I think that's a media argument only, and people that don't understand the game. So I've honestly never heard that. So I don't even know where that allegation, as you say, comes from, Joe. Be honest with you, I've never heard a serious person make that argument. So it's definitely not a one-way rivalry where USC doesn't care about it. I mean, as you said, Roger Dodger in the chat. We have a USC fan that's in our chat on our show all the time. Why? Because it's about Notre Dame. Do you think he's in? You know, I would imagine. I could be wrong, but I doubt he's like listening to Vanderbilt shows and Kansas State shows and things like that. It's Notre Dame. It's the rival. So I honestly have never heard. And look, as I said, look at the numbers. You have to go back to last time USC played a home game. I'm going to look this up. Give me a second. I'm going to get this number for you and make sure it's accurate. The last time that USC played a home game that had more fans in the stands for that game than a game that they played against Notre Dame, I believe is back in 2017. But let me find that. Yes, it is the UCLA game all the way back in 2017 is the last time USC played a home game where they had more people in attendance than what they've had for Notre Dame games in recent seasons. So yes, that is. I don't buy that. I know. I mean, people say all types of dumb things. I've never heard a legitimate argument for that. It's a rivalry game. It is almost 100. It's a 100-year rivalry. I think didn't this game start in the 20s? It's had some great matchups, and there's a great deal of respect from both sides. So, is it going to last forever? I mean, we've learned a lot that nothing lasts forever. And there could be arguments to say this rivalry isn't going to continue. There could be arguments for it. But saying it's a one-way rivalry is not accurate. That's not the reason why. And I've honestly never heard anybody make that argument, to be honest with you, Joe. I'd be curious from you, Joe, where you've heard that from. Like, who have you seen make that argument? I'd be curious to see that very much. Be curious to see that. So those are the 2 super chats from today. Reminder, if you do a super chat, it always gets pushed to the top. Andre Tonsel, start up here. Andre says, Notre Dame versus Southern Cal is one of the best rivalries in college because of how passionate the fan bases are about their teams. End of story. We all know this to be true. I agree with you, Andre, but passion of the fan base isn't the only reason to have a rivalry. It's a big reason, but there's got to be something more than just that. And I think there's plenty of reasons why this rivalry makes sense for both teams beyond just tradition. Terrence Moore with the comment, Oregon, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Nebraska. Why play Notre Dame? Well, why play Notre Dame? Because Nebraska's not a relevant football team anymore. And the other part is there's not a single season in the next 5 years where you play Oregon, Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State. Actually, I think there's one. No, there's not one. There's not 1 year in the next 5 years of where the Big Ten schedule is set, where they play Oregon, Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State in the same season. So why play Notre Dame? Because you've made a false narrative. I actually read your comment differently at the beginning and thought you were making a better point, but you're not making a better point. It's a false narrative. It's 100% a false narrative. So if you're going to say, hey, this is why you shouldn't play Notre Dame, you need to at least use evidence or an argument that's based in reality. So if you're going to say Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, and Nebraska, why play Notre Dame? Well, you only play Ohio State twice in the next 5 years. You play Michigan 3 times, you play Penn State 3 times, you play Oregon three times. So that's why you play Notre Dame, because A, it's a rivalry. I mean, like, why even watch the sport? If you don't care about the rivalries, if you don't care about tradition, why are you even watching it? Go watch the NFL. Nobody gives a crap about rivalries in the NFL outside of people in the Midwest, right? You know, California people haven't cared about rivalries in football for decades that I'm aware of. You know, so go do that. But the reality is, it's a false narrative, and you're not going to win an argument against anyone with more than 3 brain cells when you're arguing with a false data or a made up argument that's not based in reality. So the next time those 5 teams play USC in the same year, and then you come talk to me, and we may be able to have a conversation about maybe why you shouldn't do that. So it's a false narrative. If you're going to make an argument, use real facts and real data to make it. Don't make something up, because they don't play those teams. Ball Peen Shillelagh. If you had to join or create a national CFB television show, game day, etc., what would you join, or what would you create? How would it differ from your podcast content? Well, if you're going to do a television show, it has to be very different from a podcast. And what we do is a little bit more long form. It's something that people will listen to sometimes while driving. They'll have on while they're doing other things. And there's certain things that we don't have access to. So if I was doing a national college football television show like Game Day, I would do a lot more showing film, highlights, breakdowns. It honestly would look a lot like Game Day used to look. Game Day used to be this is what it was. I mean, you have the big matchups, you have the fans around, you have the stories and the getting to know the players and the game stories. I love that stuff. You know, Tom Rinaldi would just do wonderful stuff every week. And then you get into real X's and O's and real analysis. And so I would follow somewhat of that game plan, but I would hire. I mean, honestly, the problem with Game Day is not so much the format. I think the format makes a lot of sense. It's the talent. It's become too gimmicky. it's not about real analysis anymore. If you cared about real analysis, you're not firing David Pollock and keeping Desmond Howard and Lee Corso. You're just not. Maybe 10 years ago with Lee Corso, but he's not giving you really good analysis anymore. So it's become too much shtick. I would keep it more about the game. I would get former coaches to come on or former players to come on and break it down, like really break it down. I thought one of the things that Fox did really well on their pregame show was they'd have Urban Meyer get in there and break film down, do X's and O's. I would do stuff like that. Hey, if Notre Dame is going to win this game, they've got to be prepared to handle this. And we'd get on the board and we'd draw up this play and we'd show it and we'd watch the highlights and we would do all this kind of stuff. And I explained to you why it's a tough matchup for Notre Dame or for why it's a tough matchup for USC if it's Notre Dame that has to do it. I would do it from a Notre Dame perspective, and then I would have somebody talk about it from a USC perspective, just looking at that particular matchup. So, and then I would have, I would try to do that with that if that's like my spotlight game. And if I'm doing it, it's a Notre Dame thing. So it would be about that Notre Dame game. And then just talk about, what this game means for both teams and what's at stake and all that kind of stuff. And if I was doing a national college football television show, I would talk, about do something like that for like the 3 or 4 big games. And then you'd have your predictions and all that stuff at the end. So I don't think the format would change a ton. It would just make it less gimmicky, make it more about real analysis. I would want that. And the problem is, sadly, there's not a lot of people that want that. They want the gimmick. That's true in sports. That's true in politics. That's true in a lot of things. They want the show. They don't want real analysis. If I were to make write an article that had some clickbaity article about, Marcus Freeman did such and such, and I heard from a source that Marcus Freeman, yelled at a bartender at a club he was at or something like that, man, that would go viral. I do a thorough 1,000-word film analysis of the matchup against USC. Crickets. Sadly, that's who we are. That's who we are as a people. And if you're going to do something in television, it just has to be you have to meet that need. And that's why I really don't have a lot of interest in doing this. I've actually had people, a good friend of mine wanted to, he wanted to help me take it more of a TV type of thing. And I just don't have an interest in doing that because what I do is just not what people want in a television format. They don't want the that's why a lot of people didn't like Mike Mayock. He was too technical. I actually had to sit and learn the game listening to him. Imagine that. The horror. That's what I love about this IB community, because even though it's not a huge community, we've got 16,000 subscribers, a big chunk of it, they want to learn. They want to be challenged. They want to think about the game. Sadly, it's just not a huge audience that wants that. So I don't know if that part would work. They like the gimmick. They like the silly stuff. They like the celebrities and things like that. I don't care about that. Like, who's this week's celebrity picker? I was like, some guy that doesn't know football, probably. That's usually what it is, every now and then they'll get a guy that really knows the game. Like, wow, this guy actually is a fan of these teams, really knows what he's talking about. But you're like, even the quote unquote talent doesn't know much about these teams. Like you just listen to Desmond Howard talking, like, this guy doesn't know anything about the other team. Like, he doesn't have any depth of knowledge of this team. It's like, what are we doing here? And that's what makes it a bad product. But that's what people want. Man, if you watch the Fox show, pregame show, it's way better from an analysis standpoint. They give way better in-depth talk. They really break down the games and break down the matchups, and they don't get as big of an audience as ESPN. Why? Because ESPN is the show. And sadly, that's what people want. Ballpeen Shalali also asks, also for fun, this one's heading for Sean and Vince tonight, but what's your take? Pineapple on pizza, a culinary sin or a win? For me, it's terrible. I like pineapple. I like pizza. I would not put pineapple on a pizza. I like chocolate. Okay. I would not put chocolate on a pizza. I like bacon and I like Captain Crunch. I'm not putting Captain Crunch putting bacon in my Captain Crunch. Some things just shouldn't go together. So for me, it's a culinary sin for me. But I'm also, when it comes to food, I'm like, hey man, if you like it, and then that works for you. Like, my wife will get pineapple on pizza, I believe. She does that. I think it's disgusting. She got a pizza. We went to where'd we go? We went to Papa Vino's the other day over off Grape in Maine, and she got a pizza that like they make. It's like a barbecue. And I'm like, I love barbecue. I would not eat barbecue on a pizza. That's me. She likes it, so go for it. So for me, it's a culinary sin. But when it comes to food, I'm a teach their own, man. If you want to eat healthy food, go for it. If you want to eat unhealthy food, go for it. That's up to you. If you like these, like the other night where were we? We were trying to remember what I made. I made something for the other day. Oh, we made pizzas, like little mini pizzas together. I made mine on mushrooms, a portobello mushroom. So I like clean it and let it, put salt on it to let it get the moisture out, and then wipe that off, put a little olive oil on it and a little salt on it, bake it for like 10-15 minutes, take it out, put the the pizza sauce on it. I shredded some fresh mozz, put that on there and cooked it, and I had mine. That's what I had. Well, she had eggplant, and she put like peppers on hers and garlic and all this other kind of stuff, and I'm like, I can't eat that. So we had fun doing that, but it's just kind of like, look, you like what you like, I like what I like, and we have very different taste buds, my wife and I, about a lot of things. But hey, if you like it, go for it. I mean, I made her a breakfast scramble yesterday. I made grilled some sun-dried tomatoes and spinach and a little bit of olive oil, and then put one full egg and then 3 egg whites in it, and made it for her, and then put a little bit of fresh mozz on top. And she liked it and loves it. I'm like, there's the only thing in there that I would eat is the egg. Like I love mozz, but I wouldn't like mozz on eggs. But she loved it, ate every bite. And so, to each their own for me. But for me, culinary sin. Those things just don't go together for me. Aiden Benami with a super chat. Thank you, sir. To a question. Yes, I was at the Notre Dame Miami game too, and that was the loudest stadium I've ever been in besides IUBB, Indiana Basketball Assembly. The place is unreal. Wow. Yesterday, I had said something about that. Yes, about how loud that game was. And you can't always believe when people tell you that certain places aren't loud. It depends. There's a lot of things that can determine that. Hey, Irish Gordian Knot, I don't appreciate this comment. He said, asking Bryan any food question is always boring. Bryan has the food taste of an old library book. Okay, just because you're right on this does not mean that it's nice. It's not nice at all. I actually cook a lot, and I do think that I cook some very interesting stuff. It's just there's just a lot of things I don't like, so I have to be creative about things. But yeah, I don't like the fact that you said that, and I don't like the fact that it's true. I wish I liked more foods, but I don't. Another one from Ballpeen Shillelagh. One more off-topic mailbag for me. I'm going on a spontaneous family vacation to Florida next week. What's your favorite vacation spot you've been to? And where haven't you been that you'd like to go? Honestly, man, I haven't been on vacation in so long, I can't even remember. Whenever I ever do have any like downtime, we'll go to visit my family in Virginia. But I've literally, since I started this business, I haven't taken a real vacation. And even days where I'm like, I'm taking this next few days off and I'm going to take days off, I end up working anyway. I hope that can change someday, but we're not in a position right now to do that at IB. So hopefully we are someday, because I would love to go on a vacation. The last vacation I went on that was like a real vacation was probably my wife and I went on a cruise. I can't remember what it was, like 17. I can't remember when it was, actually. I'd have to ask Angela that one. But we went on a cruise, and I'm trying to remember. We went to Honduras, and there's a couple other places that we went, and that was a really, really cool place. Really cool cruise. We went and saw some old ancient Mayan ruins and did some things along those lines. But that was fun. And they had a pasta bar on the cruise ship, and they had this like grill. They made like the best tuna fish sandwich, because I like tuna fish sandwich on like hot bread. It was so good, and so we had fun on that. As far as, I've never been like a traditional vacation guy. When I was a kid, when we'd go on vacation, we'd go down to Virginia Beach and visit my dad's family. So I don't like, we went to Disneyland when I was a kid, but is it land? I don't know. Whatever the one in Florida was. Is that land or world? I don't know. But we'd go like amusement parks and stuff like that. But I really haven't thought about that, because I don't even like thinking about going on vacations, because I know I can't. What I've thought about is what I would love to do. And this is even a vacation, I don't know, is I said I would love to like rent an RV and go to every baseball park in America, but I don't even really watch baseball anymore. So I think what I would probably do is, the one thing I want to do when I retire is I'd love to get an RV and just each week go to a different college football game. That'd be a ton of fun. But for me, a vacation is just being able to chill, and I can chill at home for free. I'm sure if I really thought about it, there'd be places I'd want to go, and I'm a history guy. I would love to maybe one of these years do a tour of all the Civil War and Revolutionary War battles along the East Coast. That'd be pretty cool. But there's no way my wife would want to do that. So I honestly don't know. I haven't thought about it. Somebody give me some vacation ideas. Maybe someday if I'm actually able to go on a vacation, I'll have something fun to do. Mark Avalone, regarding make or break season, what are your opinions regarding when recruits will be impacted negatively if the on-field results do not advance and the Freeman recruiting charisma factor wanes? Look, I mean, I think look, first of all, this is not a make or break season for Notre Dame. In my opinion, I don't believe that. The only way it's a break is if the team just stinks. And I don't see any way that happens. Like a 6-6, 7-5, something like that, then it happens now. I mean, if they're a really mediocre 8-4, I'd actually say 8-4 worst team this year, then a lot of that recruiting charisma will start to wane. I mean, that's the reality is when they start to lose. But if Notre Dame's winning 10 plus games every year, then you'll still see them have success recruiting. And then hopefully that will then lead to even greater success. But, when does it start to impact them negatively is when they start to regress. So far in 2 years, Freeman's progressed 9-4, 10-3, preseason top 10 this year. So there's a lot of momentum. If they fall back and go, 8-4 or 9-4, 8-5, 7-6, then sure, it just like that, it starts to wane. So it just when they start losing, that's when it comes into play. Beefeater ND08, is the new playoff system going to increase or decrease the reliance on strength of schedule? Don't know. I mean, that's the reality. We don't know. We haven't seen them change the format. We don't know how the committee is going to view that. They say strength of schedule is going to matter. I think here's what I think that it's going to increase on strength of schedule, because strength of schedule allows them to justify getting more SEC and Big Ten teams in. That's what I think. Because you can say, well, yeah, I mean, I know that I know Texas was 9-3 and Oklahoma State was 10-2 or 11-1, and then lost the Big 12 title game to Kansas State. But we're going to take 9-3 Texas over 11-2 Oklahoma State because Texas played a tougher schedule. We're going to take 10-2 Georgia over 11-1 Miami, or 11-1 North Carolina would probably be a better example. 11-1 Georgia Tech, 11-1 Kansas State, who lost their conference title game. Oh, we're going to take 10-2 Georgia because they played a tougher schedule. We're going to take 9-3 Michigan over 10-2 Duke, who was the runner-up in the ACC, because they played a tougher schedule. So I actually think they're going to rely on it when it fits their narrative or fits their desires, would be my guess. And hopefully they rely on it. Like, I would love to see them, like, let's say Georgia this year goes 10-2 and doesn't play in the SEC title game. If they go 10-2 against that schedule, there's a lot of 11-1 teams, and I'm going to take Georgia over. Reward them for strength of schedule this year. Don't do it last year when their schedule sucked. So, encourage these teams, play good schedules. Because if you're still good, we'll get you in there. You may not be the seed you want, but you're going to be battle tested, and we're going to reward you. I'd rather have them than over an 11-1 team that lost their conference title game and played a soft schedule, or even a 12-1 conference title team that played a soft schedule. Like, here's one I'll look at from Notre Dame perspective. Give me a 10-2 Georgia team, maybe even a 9-3 Georgia team against this year's schedule. And for those who don't remember what this year's Georgia schedule is, Clemson, Kentucky, at Clemson neutral field, at Kentucky, at Bama, home against Auburn, home against Mississippi State, at Texas, Florida neutral field, at Ole Miss, home against Tennessee, home against UMass, home against Georgia Tech. A 9-3 Georgia team will have a better win. I don't know who it's going to be, but between playing Clemson, between playing Texas, between playing Bama, between playing Kentucky on the road, Ole Miss on the road, and Tennessee at home. If they go 3-3 in those games, they'll have probably 2 to 3 wins that are better than any win Notre Dame had in 2021. Notre Dame played one team worth a darn in 2021, and that team beat them by 10 on Notre Dame's home field. That 11-1 Notre Dame team against that weak schedule would not be more deserving of a playoff spot if it came down to that Notre Dame team and 9-3 Georgia against the schedule they're going to play this year. Like, reward that schedule. Don't reward Notre Dame for playing a soft schedule in 2021. Now, again, it wasn't Notre Dame's fault. It's not their fault that Florida State on the road sucked. It went 5-7. It's not their fault that Wisconsin on neutral field was disappointing as a team that year. It's not their fault that USC was down. It's not their fault that North Carolina was down. It wasn't their fault that Stanford was worse. So they didn't try to schedule weak, but it just worked out that way. Reward the team that played a brutal schedule as long as it's legit. Don't overhype all these teams in one league and then act like that's why they had a tough schedule. That's the danger of it. But look, encourage people to play tough schedules. That's good for the game. That's 100% good for the game. Aiden Benami with a super chat. Thank you, sir. Thoughts on Michigan having an investment firm back them? I think that's a terrible idea. Terrible idea. There's far too many people in college athletics that don't understand how to live within their means. And they're panicking because of the stuff, costs, expenses are so much higher. Now they have to pay players. They don't know what to do with themselves. Here's a thought, crazy idea. Live within your means. I know it's like a radical idea. You have 100,000 plus seat stadium, right? You're going to make enough money off that and enough money off sales and enough money off revenue from TV that you're going to be fine if you spend smartly. Do more things to raise money from your donors to pay for certain projects or whatever the case may be. But I think it's a terrible idea. Terrible, terrible idea, because eventually those investment firms are going to want their money back. And when you back them, they can kind of force you to maybe do some things that you're not going to be super comfortable with. And that is just not a road I would ever go down as a business. None of that. I just, nope. Aiden Benami with another mailbag question. Not sure how this has been asked, but I'm not sure why everyone is so down on our schedule. This happens to a lot of teams, and it's a 1 year of an average schedule. It is what it is. But I don't even accept the premise that it's an average schedule, Aiden. I don't. I mean, it's not a brutal schedule by any stretch. We don't know if there's a powerhouse team on it. Everyone's assuming that Florida State's going to take a step back, but let's not forget that there's a team on their schedule that was 13-1 last year and should have been in the college football playoff, in my opinion. Will they be as good as they were last year? I don't think so, but we don't know. Texas A&M was not a good team last year. They could end up being really good. Maybe Georgia Tech takes a step. Maybe Virginia takes a step. Maybe USC gets back to what they were 2 years ago instead of what they were last year. So it's not a murderer's row. On paper, it's not as tough as what the 17 schedule turned out to be. But let's be honest, the 17 schedule didn't look like it was going to be that tough either. Georgia was coming off of an 8-5 season. We didn't know they were going to be as good as they were. And as a buddy of mine pointed out to me yesterday, not only were they coming off of an 8-5 season coming into Notre Dame Stadium, but they just lost a starting quarterback, Jacob Eason, and were starting a true freshman. And of course, it turned out to be a much better loss than what we thought it was at the time, because Georgia wasn't that good the year before. They were playing a freshman quarterback. Michigan State was unranked in the preseason that year. No one thought, well, I mean, I'm sure some people did, but they weren't expected to be a 10-win team like they were. NC State turned out to be a really good football team that year. So I think Notre Dame that season played 7 or 8 ranked opponents. Well, preseason, there weren't 7 or 8 ranked opponents on there. And then there's been other years where there's a lot of people who thought that 21 schedule was going to be challenging. And it turned out not to be challenging. Because, I mean, you think about it, Wisconsin had been traditionally very good. Playing Florida State on the road, they have talent. They had gotten Mackenzie Milton in. They had some really good players. You're playing a North Carolina team that was really good the year before, and people thought they were, Sam Howell was back, and they had some talented receivers, and they were supposed to be really good again. They weren't that good. USC was, had a decent year the year before in a very COVID-shortened season. They were supposed to be better. They weren't good. So it wasn't. We thought it was going to be tougher than it was. Well, sometimes it goes that way. But just on paper, what we know, this is not a brutal schedule, but this is still a good schedule. This is still a top 25 schedule, in my opinion. So I don't accept the premise that this game is going to be not good. Just Your Ordinary Joe, what's a good example of how the fate of USC head coach went the way it did related to his record against Notre Dame, good or bad? Oh, I mean, look, I don't believe that anybody views the Notre Dame USC rivalry the same insane way that Ohio State and Michigan fans view that, where if you don't beat this rival, you're not going to be good. But the reality is when you're not a good coach and you get dominated by USC, you're not going to last very long because you're not going to be a very good team. We've never seen a Notre Dame coach struggle the way that Jim Harbaugh did against Ohio State and keep his job, because normally they weren't good. There was no example like that for Notre Dame, in my opinion. So I don't know that, I don't know that there is a situation like that. Most rivalries aren't that way. I mean, there's some, you can maybe argue Duke, North Carolina basketball would be that way, but it didn't really turn out that way. But as you look at it and you think about the Notre Dame USC rivalry, I don't think it's viewed that way, nor should it. You shouldn't have that sort of ridiculous overreaction to a team struggling. But like when Notre Dame was dominating USC in the 80s and 90s, I mean, I certainly think that impacted their coaches and them being successful. But if they would have been 10 plus wins every year and still lose to Notre Dame, they wouldn't have been fired. Charlie Weiss didn't get fired because he went 0-5 against USC. Fired because he wasn't beating anybody. That's just the reality of it. And that's where, look, Dan Devine went 3-2 against Notre Dame or against USC, won his last 3 games against USC, still got fired because that's not ultimately the standard. Growing up in Ohio, I don't remember Ohio State fans as a kid. Now, this may be different now. I'm just speaking as a kid. I don't remember Ohio State fans and Michigan fans, and that's what was in my town. You were either a Michigan fan or Ohio State fan, just like you were either a Browns fan or a Bengals fan. There's a lot more Ohio State fans than Michigan fans, but there's still a decent amount of Michigan fans. And it was always just beat them and get to the Rose Bowl. It wasn't even like you cared about losing the Rose Bowl. You wanted to win, but you didn't care as much as long as you beat Ohio State or Michigan. Didn't care about winning the national championship as long as you beat Ohio State or Michigan. Well, Notre Dame, it's like, I don't care if you beat USC. Did you win the national championship game? Why was the 1988 win over USC so big? Because they followed it up by going out and beating West Virginia. If Notre Dame would have lost to West Virginia, we wouldn't be talking about that 1988 USC Notre Dame game all that much. So I think it's because the standard is different. The way you value it is different. But certainly if a coach is consistently losing to the other, that's going to be looked at in a certain way. Absolutely will be. Aiden Benami, did Michigan have a loser's mindset this past season with their scheduling? I don't agree with Colin Cowherd at all. Honest question. No, I don't think that they did, because again, they're not trying to get out of playing the Ohio State game. If you look at Michigan, by and large, this isn't a typical thing that they've done in the past. I think also Michigan viewed their team differently and what they needed to do differently. They were trying to bounce back from some down years and trying to kind of right the ship a little bit. But this isn't a thing where Michigan is out there saying, heck, hey, we want to duck this team and do this. And the reality is the first 2 years that didn't work. So again, the exception doesn't prove the rule, but look who they have on their schedule moving forward. I mean, they scheduled Texas for next year. So this was not meant to be a permanent thing. Like, that was kind of my big thing where I had an issue with like Art Briles. I didn't have an issue with Art Briles playing softer teams early in his tenure, because you have to rebuild and you can't make your schedule so nuts that you hurt your team's ability to rebuild. But you look at Michigan, and that's kind of where they were after 2020, is you had to rebuild. And Harbaugh never played super tough non-conference schedules. And again, that's why it took him a long time, I think, to really get that team, because they would always get exposed against Ohio State. And I would argue again about this. The main reason it worked for Michigan now is not as much about Harbaugh being super smart. It's about you are facing Ryan Day instead of Urban Meyer. I'm not a big Ryan Day fan. I'm listening to Bruce Feldman and Colin Cowherd in their follow-up segment to the Notre Dame thing. Just Ryan Day's a great coach. Look at his record. And I'm like, who cares about his record? They have – what's his record in games where the opponent has even a remotely similar roster? Okay, the only team that they've beat with any consistency that way since he's been there is Penn State, who has one of the worst game day head coaches in college football. But Ryan Day gets dominated by Michigan. Is Michigan really that much different than what they were before? He made some smart coaching changes, but they're not a whole lot different than what they were before. I would actually argue that Michigan's had better rosters than what they had this year. But what's the difference? Ohio State's not as good. I'd say it's more about Ohio State than anything else. And that's why it worked. That's what I say. The exception doesn't prove the rule. Urban Meyer stays at Ohio State without all the drama. There's no way Michigan wins the last 3 games the way they did. No way, in my opinion. He's the rival is not as good of a football coach. Ryan Day is a soft guy. He acts hard, but he's not. Right? It's just people talk about they cheated. No, I mean, look, guys, again, Archer, my man, you have to come to this reality. The cheating is not why they physically beat Ohio State up in the trenches. That's the reality. Yes, they cheated, and you know my stance on the cheating. I don't think they should have been in the playoff this year. But the cheating is not why Aiden Hutchinson destroyed the Ohio State offensive tackles a couple of years ago. It's not. It's not why they ran the ball down your throat, physically beat Ohio State up. That's not the reason why. Did they gain an advantage through cheating? Of course they gained an advantage, but they didn't have the advantage in cheating this year because they weren't cheating in the game this year. We all know that. They physically beat Ohio State up because your coach is soft. Simple as that. If Urban Meyer was at Ohio State the last 3 years and the cheating happened all 3 years, you can't convince me that they'd have gone 0-3 or even 1-2 against Michigan. You can't convince me of that. You can't. But Ryan Day's there, and there you go. And that's the – I mean, I know it you're going through, in my opinion, this – it's like, first of all, this notion that they knew every single play. It's not how it works. I promise you that's not how it works, because there's going to be checks and different things they do. You didn't know every single play. You sell out this. So, okay, then why were other teams that weren't as good more competitive against Michigan than Ohio State was in certain games? Why was TCU able to beat them? They had a whole lot more time to prepare for TCU than they did Ohio State. Why were they able to do that? Why were they able to be more prepared for some other teams? Why was Georgia able to be more prepared against them than what Ohio State was? Michigan smacks Ohio State and then goes and loses to Georgia convincingly. Well, did they not cheat that game? No, they got their butts kicked in the trenches. It didn't matter if they knew what Georgia was going to do. They couldn't stop it. I mean, that's the reality of it, you know? So you can make all the excuses in the world. You're doing what Notre Dame fans did for years with Brian Kelly, is blame everybody else and not be willing to admit we have a problem at the top. Ohio State has a problem at the top. Now, hopefully for your sake, he made some moves finally this offseason to overcome that by hiring, the coaches that he did. But the problem is Ryan Day. It's not Michigan. It's not the cheating. It's Ryan Day. That's the problem. And if Ohio State beats Michigan this year, which I expect it to be, it's going to be the reverse argument, because now Michigan doesn't have as good of a coach as they did before. It really is that simple. You can blame the cheating all you want. You can. But the reality is Michigan can stop cheating, and it doesn't mean Ohio State's going to not be soft anymore. Doesn't. If Michigan didn't know all the plays Ohio State was running in 2021, it doesn't mean that they would have gotten their butts kicked in the trenches. Doesn't mean that they wouldn't have got physically the ball ran down their throat in 2022. Doesn't mean that any of that would have been different. It's just not going to happen. Not going to happen. But continue to live in the fantasy land that it's just the cheating. It's just the cheating. That's the only reason it happened. You can live in that fantasy land all you want. Notre Dame fans did that for a long time, my man. They did. They lived for a long time. They lived in this fantasy world of it's not Brian Kelly's fault. It's this, it's that. It was always Brian Kelly. It's Ryan Day. That's the problem. Eventually you're going to have to accept that. Henry Reese. I think the Irish only has 10 games scheduled next year. Which 2 teams would you add on there? I'm going to have to look at the schedule. I thought that they had 11, and we were going to bring up sort of what I would do, and I decided not to do that because we're going to save that for another show. We kind of talk about that every year. But let me pull up Notre Dame's 2025 schedule, because I thought they had 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, they only have 10. So they have Texas A&M at home, Purdue, and at Arkansas. They have USC at home, at Miami, home against NC State. Honestly, with this, I would schedule a MAC team and a a MAC team, and I don't know. Looking at, so you got BC, Miami, NC State, Syracuse, Pitt. You already have A&M, Arkansas, Purdue. I'd schedule a MAC team and another similar team, an AAC team. Some team that's not very good. I think Notre Dame's schedule's pretty challenging next year on paper. So no, I'm not going to add like Alabama or something like that. You've got your rival on there in USC. I expect them to be better. You've got 2 SEC opponents, one at home, one on the road. You have two Big Ten opponents, USC and Purdue, and you've got all your ACC opponents. So I would probably, that's probably what I would do. I think you're going to be pretty tested with that schedule. Miami's going to be very talented. USC is going to be very talented. Arkansas's, who knows what they're going to be, what they're coaching. I mean, year 2 under Mike Elko, that is not going to be easy. That is not going to be easy at all. That's going to be a really good Texas A&M football team, in my opinion. Aiden Benami, was Notre Dame ever involved with Dorian Brew? Yeah, early on, they were in a good position with Dorian Brew very early. I mean, I would even argue that they were either right there with or maybe even slightly ahead of Ohio State when he was very much younger. The fit became less workable in certain ways. Not a bad kid, just the fit wasn't there. And then, of course, when he moved to Texas, Notre Dame's moved off of Dorian Brew a while ago, but they were involved with him for a while. Leighton Burkholder, which of the summer enrollees do you see having the most impact in 2024? I think we were asked this the other day, Leighton. This is a good question. Defense, I'm predicting that it's going to be Leonard Moore is my prediction on defense. And then offensively, there's only 2 on offense. Ryan, it was funny. Ryan wrote an article. We had talked about doing an early enrollees article, and he wanted to do that. So I was like, cool, do it. And then he wrote the article for offense. I'm like, there's only 2 dudes. Like, everybody else is already here. CJ's here. Both running backs were here. 2 of the 3 receivers were here. Jack Larson was here, and 3 of the 4 linemen were here. It's just Gerby, Lambert, and Logan Saldate. So I think Gerby on offense. I think Gerby is going to, if he doesn't play a lot, I could see his level of play kind of pushing the older guys in front of him to be more effective. But I think Bodie Cahoon is going to need time. Teddy Rizak's going to need time. They're at deep depth charts. Bronte Johnson's probably going to need some time. Same with Tabron Benny Powell. So, Gerby, Logan Saldate, Rizak, Cahoon, Johnson, Benny Powell is Carson Hobbs and Leonard Moore. That's it. So one of the 2 corners, my prediction is Leonard Moore. If you like Carson Hobbs better, then the answer could be Carson Hobbs, because I do think one of the 2 corners is going to have to make an impact this year. And then, of course, I think Gerby on offense. In a lot of past years, I would go with Logan Saldate, but I think Notre Dame's in a good position at wide receiver. Henry Reese, what game do you think they wear green this year? I hope it's Florida State. Maybe. That would be my guess, is that they go with the green, the white. I think what they're going to do this year is go with the gold, green, and white. And rock that is what my guess would be. Now, will it be for the Shamrock game or will it be for the Florida State game? My guess would be it'd be Florida State game. I would like it to be I kind of wanted it to be the Louisville game, because I thought that was going to be a night game and on national TV, but I don't want it to be that game now that it's on Peacock. So my guess would be Florida State. I'm with you on that one, Henry. Ryan Loftus, Brian, what is your approach in the new era? In the new EA college football game, you build a program or in Dynasty, or do you play exhibition games mostly? So what I'll do at the beginning, Ryan, is just to kind of get, it's been over 10 years since I've played this game. Bro, I still have a PS2. Like, that tells you how long it's been since I played a video game. Is what we own is a Wii and a Nintendo 64 that my wife brought into the marriage, and then a PS2 that I brought into the marriage. We've been married 16 years. It's been a long time since I played video games. So I'll just probably play some exhibition games early just to kind of get my feel back for playing it, and what's the playbooks like, and what's the gameplay like, and just kind of getting back to the feel of the game. And then once I feel like I have that, then I'll start the Dynasty. I'm a big Dynasty fan. I love going through all the years, making recruits, recruiting, convincing guys to stay, and I'm looking forward to doing all that. So I'll play that. That's how I'll play. Just get back used to it, and then once I do, then I'll do Dynasty. I was never doing like the Road to Glory thing. I never did that very often. Like, I made myself once. So people are upset that you can't be in high school again. Whatever. I don't care about that. I was a Dynasty guy. Lucky Ducks 512 saw Will Black measured in at 6'7.5", height, 9.75 inch hands, and 34.25 inch arms. How does that compare to the OTs on the roster? Well, I mean, that's very similar to what Joe Alt was. Let me pull up Joe Alt's combine information, and I'll give you I'll give you some information on that. So let me see here real quick. Let me pull that up. So Charles Robinson had all that. So Joe Alt at the NFL Combine this year measured in at 6'8" and 5/8, 34.25-inch arms, and a 10-inch hand. So if you look at Will Black, his hands are only a quarter inch smaller than Joe Alt's. His arm length is exactly the same length as Joe Alt's, and he's only about an inch shorter than Joe Alt, and he's about 40 pounds lighter, 15, 20, about 35, 36 pounds lighter, but very similar frame to Joe Alt. Now, he's not the same player that he is, but size-wise, that's a really good size. So he matches up very well with what Joe Alt was, especially Joe coming in, because Joe was about 295 to 300 pounds when he showed up, but going into senior year, Joe was like 260. So he's actually thicker than what Joe was coming in out of high school. Jimmy James with a question. Jimmy says, "Is there a Notre Dame game? Is there a Notre Dame game? Would they be dogs this season?" Well, they're an underdog right now for A&M. I think A&M's a 1.5 favorite, so they're an underdog for that. After that, I don't know that there will be another game that you will see them be underdogs unless they just lose. So I mean, if they go out and they're not very good, then obviously there'll be some games where they're underdogs. But as of right now, if they're the team that, as long as they keep winning, they're going to be favorites, I would imagine, everybody they play after that. So that would be my guess. All right, next question here as we get close to wrapping it up, because I do want to get done before the IB Nation Sports Talk show tonight. Alex Rohr, barring any injuries, when the Notre Dame offense steps on the field, steps out onto Kyle Field, who do you think will be the starting 3 wide receivers? You may have talked about this on a past podcast, but I probably missed it. All good, Alex. If I had to pick today, my guess would be Chris Mitchell, Jaden Greathouse, and either Deion Colsey or Jaden Thomas in the boundary would be my guess as of today. Would be my guess. I'm confident in the Mitchell Jaden Greathouse one. The one I'm not as confident in is the boundary. Now I can see Micah Gilbert taking his game to another level and winning that job. I can see Bo Collins coming in, making an immediate impact. And then, of course, Deion Colsey, if the light goes on, it'll be him. Jaden Thomas, if healthy, was probably the leading candidate going into fall camp. So it could be any one of those guys. I'm not as confident in that one. Beefeater ND08, what do you think about the Montreal Alouettes hiring the Ademiola twins, then cutting Justin and picking up Aaron Lynch? Wild times Canadian football. I had no idea that happened, so I don't know. I don't have an opinion on that. I didn't even know that happened. That's unfortunate that they cut Justin and pick up Aaron Lynch. I mean, Aaron's a far better talent, but Justin's probably a little bit harder worker. But hopefully Aaron can have some success and get his head on straight. Old Jarhead does not having names on the back of jersey negatively affect NIL opportunities? No, it doesn't. I've been asked this question before. USC doesn't have names on the back of their jerseys. Did anyone think Caleb Williams had a problem getting NIL deals? They're handing out money left and right. How do you think they got Bear Alexander to leave Georgia? I'm not even faulting them for him. That's the world we live in. But no, it doesn't. I mean, I keep hearing this, and no. It's like this notion you need a name on the back of your jersey. If you're out there balling and you don't have the name back on your jersey, people are gonna know you are. Like this notion that they have to see the name on the back. And here, so then you're gonna say, do kids with long dreadlocks hurt themselves with NIL opportunities since they cover up the name on the back of their jersey? The dreadlocks covered up, so you can't see it. So is that kid gonna have less NIL opportunities than a kid who has shorter hair? No. Are you a baller or not? How do you present yourself off the field? How do you play the game? How impactful are you? That's what matters. Caleb Williams was the most marketable guy that I know in real deals. Not the Shedeur Sanders stuff that it's his last name, but just based off merit. And he doesn't have a name on the back of his jersey. So, no, I don't think that. I don't think that at all. Old Jarhead also says, what are your feelings about the new early signing period in June coming in next season? Does it help programs start to recruit even further out, such as high school freshmen? I don't know that it does that. I mean, Notre Dame, most of the guys Notre Dame's getting on this year, they weren't recruiting as freshmen, and they would be able to sign all these guys early. I think it helps teams that recruit a certain way, and it's going to hurt other teams. It's like with anything. Some teams that like to recruit throughout the season and flip people late in the season, this is going to hurt them a little bit for teams like Notre Dame that want to get guys locked in early. Like in 2023 class, if Notre Dame would have had an early signing period and Keon and Peyton Bowen don't sign early, that class probably ends up different because Notre Dame would have been able to play. Hey, they didn't want to sign here, so clearly they're not locked in. So then we need to make sure we have backup options for both of these kids because they're not locked in. So the whole, hey, I love you guys, I want to be with you guys, that would have been out the window because you're not signing. So clearly you're not committed because why would you not want to sign this early? If you're committed, why would you not want to sign early? Well, because I may want to be open to other things. Well, then I need to be open to other things. So I think it helps Notre Dame a lot. But for other teams, it's going to hurt. Joe Marciano, it's the travel, not the quality of opponent. Having to go east 3-4 times could be brutal on the players. I don't agree with that. I mean, number one, you're not going east 3 out of 4 games. I'm not quite sure what that's in response to, but this would be USC. I mean, look, guys, flights nowadays are, okay, so it's an hour-and-a-half flight. I mean, look, are you guys familiar with map? Like, and I'm not saying this disrespectfully. I don't mean this at all. But do you guys think about the travel from Los Angeles to Seattle? I mean, that's not a short trip. I know that we look at this and say, hey, they're both the West Coast, but I'm looking at it now. And a flight from Los Angeles to Seattle is 2 hours and 50 minutes. That's how long it is. A flight from Los Angeles to Columbus, Ohio, which is pretty far east, is five hours. That's a couple hours. This isn't like back in the day where you had to drive. This just, it's not like it used to be. It's not the same thing. It's just, it's that is to me a flight from Los Angeles to Seattle to 3 hours and 20 or 2 hours and 50 minutes. A flight from Los Angeles to Omaha, Nebraska, is 3 hours and 20 minutes. I mean, that's not a big change. A flight from well, hold on a second. Let me look this up real quick. Make sure I'm putting the right information. So, yeah, 5 hours, 2 hours and 50 minutes. I mean, it's a couple hours. It's not as big of a deal. It's not this isn't like driving. I mean, they were already making long trips to go on some of these Pac-12 games. It's not that big of a trip. So I don't buy that. And here's the other thing. That's not the argument he really made. That's not the argument he made. His argument was soften up the schedule. It wasn't a legitimate, I've made that argument about why I think it's stupid that these teams are going into the Big 12. I've made that argument. But again, football is different than other sports. You're making 3 or 4 trips east. But if they're happening a month apart, then it's not the same thing as the basketball team is going on the East Coast trip that's going to be a week and a half. You're playing 3-4 games a week. Those sports are the ones that are going to suffer from having to make these trips, not the football teams. Let's look at USC's schedule in 2024 and look at it from that standpoint. And I'll make my point, right? So USC this year starts the season off by playing in Las Vegas. It's not a very far trip. Then they got to go to Ann Arbor, Michigan. All right. So what's that trip like? Flight time. Let's pull it up here. Flight time from Los Angeles to Detroit. Okay. So that's a little over 4-hour trip. Okay. Then you have the next week you're at home. Then the next week you're going to Minnesota. Then you're at home. Then the next week you're going to Maryland. Then you're at home. Then the next week you're going to Washington, a trip they've been making a bunch of times. And then the rest of the year, bye week, Nebraska at home, at UCLA, it's across the street, and Notre Dame. I mean, how's that any different than what Notre Dame does? How's that any different than this year Notre Dame has to fly down to Texas, and then Notre Dame has to fly down to Atlanta, and then Notre Dame has to fly out to the East Coast twice, and then Notre Dame has to end the season flying out to Los Angeles? How's that any different? You don't hear Notre Dame bitching about, oh, we need to not play USC because we travel too much. You don't hear that. And again, at the end of the day, you made this choice. You could have stayed in the Pac-12 and done all this. You made this choice. So if they have to travel east 3 or 4 times, welcome to Notre Dame's world. Welcome to Notre Dame's universe, where they have to do this all the time. Andy Milton fan, which network does the best job producing games, puts out the best product? I mean, ABC games are probably the best still. I mean, I like CBS games too. The music and stuff is good, but as far as the actual game, I'd probably say ABC. Last few, Beefeater. How much money will a playoff game of South Bend bring in than the Ohio State game last year? It'd probably be very similar. I don't think it'll be a whole lot more. Maybe it'll be very. I mean, Ohio State. Use a different example than Ohio State or Georgia. Those are big ones. So we'll see here. And then we're going to end it with that because Joe, you and I will have the French toast conversation another time, my friend, because I am going to. Actually, there's some breaking news. Looks like Jabron Payne just had surgery on his ACL. And so I will give the guys a heads up about that. Maybe they'll talk about the next show, but they're getting ready to start IB Nation Sports Talk, folks. Head on over there, and the guys will be live with you then. Hey, thanks for being with me today. I had fun today. Hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit the notification bell, sign up for the newsletter at the bottom. You get all of our written content. Go to irishbreakdown.com for that written content. And, of course, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you again very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.